Chapter 1. The Sands before the Nile. Before the land of towering pyramids and golden crowns, before temples rose to meet the sun, there was only the desert, endless and quiet, a landscape shaped by wind and stone. The Nile, still young in the memory of the earth, carved a single green thread through this vast emptiness. It was here, along this winding river, that life began to cling to the land. But there were no kings then, only scattered groups of people moving with the seasons, their eyes always watching the river's flow. These were the nomads, hunters, and gatherers who followed the wild herds and shifting patterns of nature. They left little behind, no great monuments, no written words, but their footprints marked the edges of what would become history. The desert was harsh, but the river whispered promises of life. Each year, its waters rose and fell, flooding the banks and leaving behind a dark, fertile soil unlike any other in this dry world. In these early days, survival was a delicate balance. People lived in small bands, their lives shaped by the rivers, gifts, and its dangers. Crocodiles lurked in the shallows. Hippos thundered through the reeds. Yet, for all its wildness, the Nile offered something no other place could: the hope of abundance. Gradually, the nomads began to linger longer near its banks. They learned the patterns of the flood, the cycles of planting and harvest. The desert remained vast and untamed, but within its embrace, small seeds of civilization began to stir. Over generations, these gatherings grew more permanent. Families built simple homes of mud and reeds. They crafted tools from stone and bone. They wove baskets and shaped pottery. Slowly, the river's rhythm became their own. What was once a wandering life turned towards settlement, and though no pharaoh yet ruled, the Nile had already become the silent ruler of this world, a lifeline threading through the desert without kings. The gift of the river. With each passing year, the Nile revealed its deeper gifts. The annual floodwaters, feared and revered, transformed the landscape. When the river swelled, it swallowed the land. When it retreated, it left behind Kemet, the black land, a rich layer of silt that made the earth fertile beyond imagination. In a land surrounded by endless sand, this strip of dark soil became a narrow cradle of life. Communities grew along the banks, drawn by the certainty of the harvest. They planted barley and emmer wheat, flax and vegetables. Fishing became a way of life, as did the hunting of waterfowl and the gathering of papyrus. In time, trade emerged. Stone, timber, and precious stones were exchanged between villages. A simple economy began to take shape, rooted in the cycles of the river. But the Nile's influence extended beyond the material. Its rising and falling became a sacred rhythm, a symbol of life, death, and renewal. The river was more than a force of nature. It was a living god. Myths began to form around its power. People spoke of Hapi, the Nile god, whose generous spirit brought the floods. Rituals were held to honor this unseen presence. Offerings cast into the waters with hope and reverence. In this way, belief wove itself into daily life. Temples began as small shrines along the river's edge. Priests emerged, keeping the ancient knowledge of the floods, the stars, and the land. They became advisors and spiritual guides, their influence growing with each generation. The river also shaped time itself. Early Egyptians marked the year not by the sun or the moon alone, but by the Nile's rise. The first day of the flood marked the new year, a time of joy and gratitude. In this world, Shaped by water and spirit, the seeds of Egypt's profound spiritual culture were planted. As villages expanded, they carried this reverence with them. The Nile had given them life, food, and trade. It had taught them to honor the unseen forces that governed their world. And in doing so, it laid the foundation for a civilization unlike any other, a land where nature, spirit, and human ambition would soon intertwine. The seeds of unity. As settlements thrived, the bonds between them grew more complex. Along the length of the Nile, from the delta to the distant cataracts, villages dotted the banks like stars along a winding path. But peace was never guaranteed. With fertile lands scarce beyond the river's embrace, competition was inevitable. Rival chiefs, each ruling their own small domain, vied for control. Sometimes they traded, sometimes they fought. Alliances formed and fractured like the shifting sands. But amid this tension, a new understanding began to take root. Unity could bring strength. Those who forged lasting alliances gained access to greater resources, more land, more people, more power. Leaders emerged whose vision extended beyond their own village. They sought to bind neighboring communities under a single banner. Through marriage, diplomacy, and at times conquest, larger territories began to form. Chiefdoms became proto-kingdoms, their leaders adopting new symbols of authority, ceremonial staffs, elaborate headdresses, and sacred objects that spoke of divine favor. The river played its part in this story. Its unbroken flow linked distant lands, making communication and travel possible. What happened upstream affected those downstream, binding all who lived along its banks in a shared destiny. The need to manage the floods, to maintain the canals and fields, required cooperation. Over time, this necessity wove the scattered threads of society into a more unified whole. Yet this was not a sudden transformation. It unfolded over centuries, shaped by countless lives and quiet decisions. There was no single moment when Egypt was born, only the slow gathering of will and wisdom, and as leaders looked to the future, they began to dream of something greater, a land united not just by geography, but by purpose and belief. In this fragile unity, the first echoes of kingship could be heard. Chiefs spoke of divine right, of ancestors who communed with the gods. The idea of a single ruler, one who embodied both mortal strength and sacred duty, began to take shape. The desert, once without kings, was preparing to crown its first. The symbols of the divine king. In time, the vision of unity became reality. Through conquest and diplomacy, two great regions emerged: Upper Egypt in the south and Lower Egypt in the north. Each had its own traditions, gods, and rulers. But the dream of a single Egypt persisted. At last, a leader rose, one whose name would be remembered in legend. Nama, known also as Menes, is often credited with achieving the first unification of Egypt. Whether through battle or marriage, he brought the two lands together. And with this union came powerful symbols to mark the new order. Foremost among these was the double crown, the red crown of Lower Egypt and the white crown of Upper Egypt, combined into a single striking headdress. This crown was more than royal attire. It declared that the wearer ruled both lands, bridging the old divisions with a new sacred authority. But kingship in Egypt was never mere politics. From the beginning, it was entwined with the divine. The pharaoh was seen as the earthly embodiment of Horus, the falcon god of kingship. In life, he ruled as Horus, In death, he joined Osiris, lord of the afterlife. This belief gave the king a role beyond that of a leader. He became the living link between heaven and earth. Royal symbols reflected this sacred role. The crook and flail, carried by the pharaoh, represented his duty to guide and protect his people. The uraeus, a rearing cobra worn on the crown, symbolized divine power and protection. Every gesture, every ceremony reinforced the idea that the king's rule was sanctioned by the gods. This fusion of earthly and divine shaped every aspect of Egyptian civilization. The pharaoh's word became law. Temples rose in his honor, and vast tombs were prepared to ensure his eternal life. Yet beneath these grand expressions lay a simple truth. The people believed. They saw in their king the embodiment of cosmic order, the balance of life and death, the harmony of the river and the desert. Thus, from the sands of a land without kings, a civilization was born, one where the Nile's eternal flow carried not just water, but the dreams of a people bound together by faith, by purpose, and by the enduring symbols of their divine king. Chapter 2. The First Pharaohs. History remembers Menes as a man of vision and power, a king who in a time of rivalry and division dared to dream of unity. But his story comes to us through the soft veils of legend. Fact and myth entwine like the lotus and papyrus, one rooted in the mud of history, the other floating upon the waters of memory. Before Menes, Egypt was two lands. Upper Egypt in the south, its symbol the white crown, tall and narrow like a cone. Lower Egypt in the north, marked by a red crown with a curling protrusion, wide and flat. Each land had its own kings, its own gods, its own ways of life. For generations, they existed in uneasy balance. Skirmishes flared along their borders. Alliances came and went. The Nile connected them, yet also divided them. Then came a king, perhaps Menes, perhaps a figure whose name time has lost, who would bring them together. Some stories say he led a great army north, defeating his rivals in a climactic battle. Others suggest a more peaceful path, a slow weaving of alliances, sealed through marriage and diplomacy. Whatever the truth, by the end of this era, the two lands stood as one. The symbol of this unity was the double crown, the red and the white, worn together upon the head of a single ruler. It was not merely a badge of conquest, it was a promise, a vow that the king would serve both Upper and Lower Egypt, binding their people beneath the eternal sky. The king was no longer just a man, he was the living Horus, the falcon god on earth. His role was not only to rule, but to maintain the balance of all things. Menes' reign marks the dawn of recorded Egyptian history. With him begins the first dynasty, the first of many to inscribe their deeds upon stone and memory. In this new era, the pharaoh would stand at the heart of life itself, a bridge between the heavens and the land, between gods and men. His was an eternal crown, and its legacy would echo through the ages. Building a sacred order. The earliest pharaohs understood a truth that would shape Egypt for millennia. Power alone was not enough. To rule a land so vast and ancient required more than armies and laws. It required order, a cosmic order that bound the world in harmony. This order was called Ma'at. Ma'at was the balance of all things, the rising and falling of the Nile, the turning of the stars, the fairness of justice, the honesty of one's words. To violate Ma'at was to invite chaos. And so, the pharaoh's duty was not merely to govern, but to uphold this sacred balance. He was the living embodiment of Ma'at on earth. To weave Ma'at into daily life, the early kings turned to ritual and symbol. From the mud and stone of the riverbanks, they raised the first temples. These were not yet the grand stone sanctuaries of later ages, but humble places where the eternal could touch the earth. Within them, priests performed ancient rites, offering food, incense, and song to the gods. Through these acts, they maintained the harmony of the world. The role of the priesthood grew swiftly. They became the keepers of wisdom, watchers of the stars, counters of the floods, interpreters of the gods' will. Their calendars guided the planting and harvest. Their words shaped law and custom. Though the pharaoh stood at the apex of power, he leaned upon the priests to anchor his reign in the unseen truths of the cosmos. Ma'at also shaped human law. The earliest legal codes sought not only to punish wrongdoing, but to restore balance. Justice was measured not by vengeance, but by the needs of the community. A false accusation was seen as a disruption of Ma'at, a fair judgment, its restoration. In this sacred order, the pharaoh found the true strength of his throne. His rule was not an accident of force, but a divine necessity. To oppose the king was to oppose the harmony of the universe itself. And so, through ritual and belief, Egypt's rulers built a society where heaven and earth moved as one, each in service of the eternal balance. Taming the floods. The Nile was Egypt's heartbeat. Its annual flood brought life to the land, renewing the fields with dark, fertile silt. But this gift was unpredictable. Too low a flood meant famine. Too high a flood could destroy homes and crops. To tame this mighty river was to hold the fate of Egypt in one's hands. The early pharaohs understood this well. From the first days of unification, they began to turn their gaze to the river's restless flow. Their goal was simple: to harness the Nile's power, to transform its floods from a source of fear into a wellspring of prosperity. They began with small works, canals and dikes, dug by hand with stone tools and sheer determination. These channels guided the floodwaters into the fields, spreading them evenly across the land. When the waters receded, the fields lay rich and ready for the plough. Over time, more ambitious projects followed. Reservoirs were created to store excess water. Networks of irrigation channels reached farther and farther from the river's banks. These efforts had profound effects. Surplus crops became possible for the first time. With more grain than was needed for survival, communities could support artisans, builders, and priests. The economy of Egypt began to grow, not just in wealth, but in complexity. And with this growth came greater power for the pharaoh. Control of the water meant control of the harvest. Control of the harvest meant control of the people. The pharaoh's officials recorded every measure of grain, every basket of dates and figs, every head of cattle. Taxes were collected in kind, filling royal storehouses with the bounty of the land. In lean years, the king's granaries could feed the people, reinforcing his role as protector and provider. Irrigation also deepened Egypt's sense of unity. Great projects required labor from many villages, binding them in common cause. The king's vision stretched from the delta to the southern cataracts, carried by the waters of the Nile. Under his rule, the land itself was shaped to serve the needs of the living and to uphold the sacred balance of Ma'at. Through the taming of the floods, Egypt's future was secured. The river's gifts, once fleeting, now flowed steadily into the hands of the state, and with each passing season, the pharaoh's grip upon the land grew stronger, as steady as the river's own eternal flow. The bones of the dead. Even as Egypt's kings built for the living, they also began to build for the dead. The earliest tombs were simple, graves marked by stones or shallow mounds. But with unification and the rise of royal power came a new vision of the afterlife, one that demanded grander monuments. In the desert sands of Saqqara and Abydos, the first great tombs took shape. These were the mastabas, rectangular structures of mud brick, their sides sloping gently inward. Within them, deep shafts led to burial chambers, where the dead were laid to rest with treasures and offerings. For the pharaohs, the mastaba was more than a resting place. It was a bridge between worlds, a portal through which the king might journey to the stars. The walls were inscribed with scenes of daily life, of offerings made by loyal subjects, of boats sailing upon the celestial Nile. Every image, every symbol was a prayer for eternal life. The mastaba also reflected a growing obsession with permanence. The desert winds might wear down stone and brick, but memory, if carefully tended, could last forever. And so, the kings of the early dynasties poured resources into these tombs, filling them with statues, amulets, and sacred texts. The goods of the living were offered to sustain the dead. Around the royal tombs, the elite sought to mirror the king's path. Nobles and officials built their own mastabas nearby, hoping to share in the pharaoh's divine favor. In death, as in life, proximity to the king was a mark of status and hope. Yet even these early monuments hinted at greater ambitions. The flat mastaba would soon give rise to new forms, step pyramids that reached toward the sky, true pyramids that defied the ages. But in these first tombs, the spirit of Egyptian kingship was already clear. To rule Egypt was to rule for eternity, not just beneath the sun, but among the stars. Here, in the bones of the dead, we glimpse the dreams of the living, dreams of a life beyond life, of a king whose crown would never tarnish, whose name would never fade. And in the sands of Saqqara and Abydos, those dreams still whisper, carried on the desert winds. Chapter 3. The Pyramid Builders. There are moments in history when the world tilts, when a single vision reshapes the land. One such moment came during the reign of Pharaoh Djoser, a king of Egypt's third dynasty. Until his time, the tombs of rulers had been simple mastabas, flat, rectangular structures that rested heavily upon the earth. But Djoser desired more. He dreamed not of lying hidden beneath the sands, but of rising toward the sky. And to bring this vision to life, he turned to a man whose name would echo through the ages: Imhotep. Imhotep was more than an architect. He was a scholar, a priest, a healer, a mind attuned to both the earthly and the divine. Under Djoser's command, Imhotep conceived a design never before attempted, a pyramid built in steps, layer upon layer of stone, each rising above the last. It was an audacious plan. No one had shaped stone on such a scale. No one had reached so boldly for the heavens. At Saqqara, the work began. Vast quarries yielded limestone blocks, each cut and hauled by the hands of thousands. Wooden sledges groaned beneath their weight. Ramps of mud brick and earth wound around the growing monument. Slowly, the mastaba stretched upward, first one level, then two, then more. 6 steps in all, each one lifting the king closer to the eternal sky. The step pyramid of Djoser was not merely a tomb. It was a statement, a declaration that the pharaoh was more than mortal. In life, he ruled the land. In death, he would ascend to join the gods. The pyramid became a bridge between worlds, its rising form a symbol of the king's eternal journey. Around it, a vast complex took shape. Temples, courtyards, and storerooms spread across the desert plateau. Walls of white limestone enclosed the sacred space, gleaming in the sun. Within these walls, rituals unfolded, rites to honor the king, to sustain his spirit, to ensure that Ma'at, the cosmic balance, endured. When Djoser passed from this world, he was laid to rest deep within the pyramid's heart. Above him, stone upon stone reached skyward, a monument to human will and divine aspiration. The Step Pyramid had changed Egypt forever. The race toward the sky had begun, the age of monumental kings. In the shadow of Djoser's triumph, a new age dawned, an age of kings who sought to surpass their forebears, to etch their greatness in limestone and gold. The art of construction advanced with each generation, fueled by ambition and the ceaseless desire to touch the heavens. Pharaoh Sneferu, founder of the Fourth Dynasty, led the charge. Where Djoser had built a step pyramid, Sneferu dreamed of a true one, a smooth-sided mountain of stone that would gleam beneath the sun. His quest drove innovation in design, engineering, and labor. His builders experimented with angles, materials, and techniques, learning with each attempt. Temples grew grander, their columns carved to resemble bundles of reeds, their walls alive with images of gods and kings. Reliefs told stories of conquest, of offerings, of journeys to the stars. Statues of the pharaoh stood in solemn majesty, eyes gazing into eternity. Each monument was both a testament and a prayer, a means of ensuring that the king's name would endure through time. The workforce that built these wonders was vast. Tens of thousands of laborers, craftsmen, and engineers converged at each site. Contrary to old tales of slaves in chains, many were skilled workers, proud of their role in shaping Egypt's eternal landscape. They lived in nearby villages, their needs met by the state, their labor organized with precision. With each pyramid, knowledge deepened. Stones were cut more finely, placed more precisely. Internal chambers grew more elaborate, designed to guard the royal remains and treasures within. The alignment of the structures grew more exact, their sides facing the cardinal points, their peaks reaching ever higher. Through these efforts, the image of the pharaoh transformed. No longer merely a ruler of the land, he became a cosmic being, a son of the sun god Ra, destined to ascend to the stars. His pyramid was not just a tomb, it was a cosmic engine, a vessel for the soul's eternal flight. In this age of monumental kings, Egypt's landscape was forever changed. Where once the desert lay empty, now great stone mountains rose, visible for miles. They spoke of power, of faith, of a people who believed that through stone and spirit, they could bridge the divide between earth and sky. The bent pyramid's lesson. But not all ambition leads to triumph. The path to greatness is often marked by trial and error, a truth revealed in the story of the bent pyramid at Dashur. During his reign, Pharaoh Sneferu sought to perfect the true pyramid. His builders began with steep sides, eager to reach new heights. The lower portion of the structure rose swiftly, its angles sharp and bold, but as the pyramid grew, cracks began to appear. The weight of the stone pressed inward, threatening collapse. The builders faced a stark choice: abandon the project or adapt. They chose adaptation. Above a certain point, the angle of the sides was abruptly changed, made shallower to reduce stress on the structure. The result was a pyramid with a distinctive bent profile, its lower portion steep, its upper portion gently sloped. The bent pyramid stands today as a testament to both human ambition and humility, It reveals a time when even kings, even gods on earth, had to bow before the laws of stone and gravity. Yet it is also a symbol of perseverance. Rather than hide their misstep, the builders completed the pyramid, honoring the work already done. This lesson shaped future efforts. Engineers studied the bent pyramid's flaws, learning how to balance height with stability. They refined their methods, improving the foundations, the internal support structures, the precision of stone placement. From error came wisdom. From imperfection, progress. The bent pyramid remains one of Egypt's most fascinating monuments. Its gleaming casing stones, many still intact, offer a rare glimpse of how these structures once shone beneath the sun. Its chambers, uniquely accessible, reveal the evolving art of pyramid construction, and its very form speaks to the resilience of the human spirit, the willingness to learn, to adapt, and to continue the climb toward the sky. The Great Pyramid of Giza. From these lessons arose the greatest monument of all, the Great Pyramid of Giza, the masterpiece of Pharaoh Khufu. Khufu, also known as Cheops, ruled during the 4th dynasty, an era of immense power and confidence. Determined to surpass all who came before, he envisioned a pyramid without equal, a mountain of stone that would stand for eternity. The scale of the project was staggering. Over 2 million limestone blocks, each weighing several tons, would be quarried, transported, and set in place. The core stones came from nearby quarries. The finest casing stones were brought from Tura across the river. The work required a vast and well-organized workforce: laborers, stone cutters, haulers, overseers, engineers. Construction techniques remain a subject of study and wonder. Ramps of earth and brick likely wound around the growing structure, allowing stones to be dragged upward. Teams of workers coordinated their efforts with remarkable precision, aligning each block with care. The pyramid's sides were oriented with astonishing accuracy, nearly perfectly aligned to the cardinal points. As the pyramid rose, so too did its meaning. It was not merely a tomb, it was the cosmic axis, the place where Earth touched the heavens. Its dimensions encoded sacred geometry, its form mirrored the rays of the sun. Within its hidden chambers, the king's body would rest, prepared for an eternal journey among the stars. When completed, the Great Pyramid stood 146 meters tall, the tallest structure on Earth for over 3,800 years. Its smooth white casing gleamed in the sun, visible for miles across the desert. It proclaimed the power of Khufu, the divine right of kings, the triumph of Ma'at. Yet its message was deeper still. It spoke of human possibility, of what can be achieved through vision, knowledge, and collective effort. The Great Pyramid endures as the last of the ancient 7 wonders, a bridge across time that continues to inspire awe. Beneath its silent stones, the voices of tens of thousands echo still. Their labor shaped this eternal monument, a testament not only to one man's will, but to the enduring spirit of a civilization that dared to reach for the sky. Chapter 4. The Reign of the Sun. Kings. There are kings who rule their time, and there are kings who shape the future. Pharaoh Sneferu was one such ruler. His reign, during the dawn of Egypt's 4th dynasty, brought an era of unmatched ambition and wealth. Where others had built for the here and now, Sneferu built for eternity. His court shimmered with gold, stone, and vision. The lessons of the bent pyramid had not dissuaded him. They had inspired him. Determined to perfect the art of pyramid construction, he embarked on not one, but multiple grand projects. Under his watchful gaze, the Red Pyramid rose at Dashur, the first true smooth-sided pyramid ever completed. It stood as a gleaming beacon of what human will could achieve. But Sneferu's vision extended beyond stone. His court became a center of innovation and splendor. Artisans refined their crafts, shaping statues of serene beauty and reliefs that danced with life. The pharaoh's architects and scribes recorded each triumph, ensuring that his deeds would outlast even the longest reign. Trade flourished as never before. Caravans brought exotic goods from distant lands. Gold from Nubia, lapis lazuli from the far-off mountains, and fine woods from beyond the seas all found their way into Egypt's treasuries. With each new treasure, the power of the Golden Court grew, yet beneath the grandeur lay a deeper purpose. Every stone laid, every statue carved, every ritual performed served a singular aim: to bind the pharaoh's name to eternity. Sneferu understood what it meant to be a sun king, not merely to rule the land, but to shine through the ages. And in this pursuit, his court set a new standard for all who would follow: ships and stones. As Egypt's ambitions soared, so too did its reach. The Nile was its lifeblood, but the river alone could not satisfy the hunger for resources needed to fuel its mighty monuments. And so, Egyptian fleets ventured beyond familiar waters, turning the gaze of the Sun Kings outward, to the Mediterranean, to the Red Sea and beyond. Crafted from papyrus and timber, the early ships evolved into sturdy vessels capable of long voyages. Under Sneferu's command, expeditions sailed to the fabled shores of Byblos, in what is now Lebanon. There, towering forests of cedar awaited, wood prized for its strength and beauty. Egyptian envoys secured great logs, floated them down the coast, and brought them up the Nile. These timbers would form the beams of temples and the hulls of new ships, expanding Egypt's power. Far to the east, the mines of Sinai glittered with promise. Copper, essential for tools and weapons, lay hidden beneath the rugged hills. Egyptian miners braved the desert, carving deep into the rock. Alongside copper, they gathered turquoise, its blue-green hues favored by kings and queens alike. These treasures flowed back to Egypt, enriching both its economy and its art. The Red Sea offered another gateway. Though more perilous, it led to lands of incense and exotic goods. Ships ventured south, returning with myrrh, frankincense, and rare spices, offerings worthy of the gods themselves. This age of exploration bound Egypt to the wider world. Foreign princes sent tribute. Distant lands marveled at the reach of the Sun Kings. Stone and cedar, copper and incense, all flowed toward the heart of Egypt. With these materials, the pharaohs could raise monuments to match their eternal aspirations. Yet, each voyage carried more than goods. It carried ideas, stories, and a growing sense of Egypt's place in the world. The Sun Kings stood not alone, but as lords of a vast and connected realm, one whose ships and stones would shape the landscape for generations. Gods walk among men. As Egypt's wealth and influence grew, so too did the aura of its kings. Once, mortal rulers blessed by the gods, the pharaohs of this golden age began to claim a more profound identity. They were not merely chosen by the gods, they were gods themselves, walking among men. This transformation was no simple boast. It was woven into every thread of life. Ritual and rule became one. The pharaoh embodied Ma'at, the cosmic order, but also something greater, the living essence of the sun god Ra. Ra's rise in prominence reshaped the spiritual landscape. The sun's daily journey across the sky mirrored the pharaoh's own passage through life and death. At dawn, Ra was reborn. At dusk, he descended into the underworld. The king too would follow this eternal cycle, his soul rising with the sun to reign among the stars. Temples dedicated to Ra multiplied. Great open courtyards welcomed the sun's rays, while towering obelisks reached skyward like frozen shafts of light. In ceremonies held beneath the blazing sky, the pharaoh took on the mantle of the god, his every gesture reinforcing the divine connection. The people embraced this vision. To serve the king was to serve the divine. To obey his laws was to uphold the balance of the universe. The boundaries between mortal and God blurred, shaping a society where the ruler's will was both law and sacred command. This fusion of spiritual and political power deepened Egypt's unity. In the pharaoh, the nation found both leader and link to the heavens. His presence sustained the land. His absence invited chaos. And so, the cult of kingship grew. Its rituals more elaborate, its symbols more potent, its grip upon the hearts of the people ever stronger. Yet this elevation carried a hidden cost. To be a god among men was to bear a burden beyond mortal comprehension. The dance between earth and sky would demand ever greater sacrifices, and in time would sow the seeds of doubt and fear. The burden of immortality, for all their power, the Sun Kings could not escape the shadow of mortality. The very act of proclaiming themselves gods heightened the fear of death. To lose the king was to risk the balance of the world, and so Egypt began its long and intricate dance with death, an effort to outwit time itself. Tombs grew more elaborate, deeper, and more secure. Architects devised hidden chambers, false passages, and secret seals. The goal was clear: protect the pharaoh's body and treasures from both decay and desecration. For in the afterlife, the king would need his earthly goods, his servants, his name intact. Priesthoods dedicated to funerary rites gained prominence. They mastered the art of mummification, preserving the body in lifelike form. Spells and incantations were inscribed upon tomb walls and papyrus scrolls, guiding the king's soul through the perilous journey of the underworld. The Book of the Dead, a collection of such spells, became a vital companion for the departed. Within its pages lay maps of the afterlife, passwords to pass celestial gates, and hymns to appease divine judges. Each word, each image, was a shield against oblivion. Yet with each effort to secure eternity, paranoia grew. Court intrigues multiplied. Priests guarded their knowledge jealously. The race to outwit tomb robbers became a cat-and-mouse game played across generations. The deeper the tomb, the greater the secrecy, but also the greater the isolation of the king in death. This obsession with immortality shaped every facet of Egypt's culture. Art and architecture, religion and governance, all revolved around the quest to preserve the king's legacy. And in this pursuit, the Sun Kings revealed their deepest truth. Even gods among men must one day face the unknown. As the golden light of this era began to wane, Egypt stood adorned with wonders, pyramids and temples, statues and scrolls, ships and stones. Yet beneath the splendor lay a growing awareness of time's inexorable flow. The dance with death had begun, and Egypt would follow its steps for millennia to come. Chapter 5: Collapse and Rebirth. For centuries, the land of Egypt had seemed eternal. Its rivers gave life, its fields fed the people, and its kings ruled as gods upon the earth. The Old Kingdom had built wonders that reached toward the heavens: pyramids, rising from the desert sands, eternal tombs for the divine pharaohs. Beneath the gaze of Ra, the sun god, the order of Ma'at, truth, balance, and harmony, had held the two lands together, but even the mightiest structures cannot stand against the quiet hand of nature. The Nile, lifeblood of Egypt, began to fail. The once reliable floods no longer rose to nourish the soil. Without these waters, the fields turned dry and barren. Hunger spread across the land, unsettling hearts and breaking the ancient trust in the gods. Ma'at, the sacred order, seemed to wither along with the crops. With famine came fear, and with fear came strife. The royal court, once a place of unity, grew divided. Resources dwindled, loyalty wavered, and the strong grip of the pharaoh weakened. No longer could he command unwavering respect. Across the wide valley of the Nile, local nobles and officials began to act for their own gain. They hoarded food, built private armies, and carved out small realms of power. The center of Egypt's strength fractured. In the shadow of the once glorious pyramids, the old kingdom began to crumble. Villages abandoned the rituals that had once tied them to the capital. Temples fell silent as priests lost their flocks and offerings dried up. The great building projects ceased. Workers and artisans scattered to survive. Roads, once bustling with trade and travelers, lay empty or dangerous. Law gave way to force, and the vision of an eternal Egypt seemed to vanish like dust in the wind. The fall of the Old Kingdom was not a sudden collapse, but a slow unraveling, a generations-long twilight that turned a golden age into a memory, an age without pharaohs. In the centuries that followed, Egypt entered an age of darkness, an era known today as the First Intermediate Period. Where once a single pharaoh had ruled from Memphis, now the land was divided among many. Warlords and petty kings claimed power over regions large and small. They wore crowns, held court, and styled themselves as rulers, but their authority was thin, and their domains were fragile. Without the unifying force of a true pharaoh, Egypt's identity seemed lost. Conflict simmered constantly. Local rulers fought to expand their lands or defend them from rivals. Small fortresses rose along the riverbanks, their walls a grim symbol of a divided nation. The old capital of Memphis lost its shine, while new centers of power emerged in different regions. The ideals of Ma'at struggled to survive in a time ruled by ambition and fear. Justice became a rare thing. The poor were left vulnerable. The great stories of the gods were told less often, and the temples fell into disrepair. And yet, in the quiet corners of Egypt, the ancient faith did not die. There were priests and scribes who continued to honor the old ways. In remote sanctuaries and hidden chapels, the rites of Ra, Osiris, and Isis still echoed. Amid broken statues and crumbling walls, lamps were lit and prayers were whispered. These guardians of memory held fast to a vision of Egypt beyond the troubles of their age. They believed the land would rise again, that one day a true pharaoh would restore the balance of Ma'at and heal the wounds of the two lands. In this dark chapter, the spirit of Egypt was tested but not extinguished. Through the persistence of its faith and the memory of its greatness, the seeds of renewal lay waiting beneath the surface. And as the years turned, a new force began to stir in the far south, a spark that would soon grow into a flame. The rise of Thebes. Far from the old capital of Memphis, in the fertile lands of Upper Egypt, lay the city of Thebes. In the troubled times that followed the Old Kingdom's fall, Thebes had been a modest city, little more than one among many. But as the centuries passed and Egypt remained divided, Thebes began to grow in power and ambition. Its kings, once regional rulers, saw an opportunity to restore unity to the land. The Theban kings were shrewd and determined. They built strong alliances and forged capable armies. Through both diplomacy and war, they began to push against rival rulers, expanding their influence along the Nile. Their cause was more than political. It was wrapped in the ancient ideals of Ma'at. They portrayed themselves not merely as conquerors, but as restorers of order and justice. This message resonated in a land weary of chaos. With each victory, the Theban kings reclaimed more of Egypt's ancient heart. Town by town, province by province, the two lands began to knit themselves back together. The battles were not easy, and the scars of division ran deep. Yet the Theban cause gained momentum, fueled by a vision of a reborn Egypt. Alongside military might came cultural revival. The Theban kings patronized temples and restored religious ceremonies. The great festival of Opet was revived, and processions once again filled the streets with color and devotion. The city of Thebes itself grew grander, its temples rising in stone as symbols of divine favor. The Amun priesthood, centered in Thebes, became a powerful spiritual force, binding the people's hopes to the rising fortunes of their kings. The struggle for unity spanned generations. It was not the work of a single lifetime, but of a line of rulers committed to a shared dream. And at last, the effort bore fruit. The land was reunified. The two lands once again joined under one crown. From the city of Thebes, a new dynasty would rise, ushering in a second great age for Egypt, an age born not from conquest alone, but from the enduring will to restore the sacred order of Ma'at. The God Kings return. With the reunification of Egypt, the pharaoh's divine image returned in full splendor. The Theban rulers understood the power of this image, not just as a tool of rule, but as a symbol of the very soul of Egypt. They embraced their role as living gods, chosen by the heavens to maintain harmony upon the earth. Through their rule, the broken order was mended, Ma'at was restored. New temples soared beneath the skies of Thebes. The great complex at Karnak began its long rise, destined to become one of the most magnificent sacred sites in the ancient world. Columns thick as forests were carved with hymns and images honoring the gods. Processional avenues were lined with statues, and the priests of Amun led rituals that reaffirmed the pharaoh's bond with the divine. Art and culture blossomed once more. The scribes chronicled the deeds of the new god kings, their words etched in stone and papyrus to endure through the ages. Stories of rebirth echoed through the land. Egypt had faced the shadow of chaos and emerged into the light. The pharaoh's court attracted talent from across the land: artists, craftsmen, poets, and scholars. Together, they contributed to a cultural renaissance that renewed Egypt's identity. The heart of this revival was not pride alone, but faith. The belief that Egypt had been chosen by the gods to embody cosmic order drove the efforts of its rulers. The pharaoh, as son of Ra and chosen of Amun, stood as the axis between heaven and earth. His rule was both political and spiritual, a living testament to the resilience of the nation. Thus began the Middle Kingdom, a second golden age of ancient Egypt. Out of famine and strife, through darkness and division, the land had found its way back to harmony. The lessons of the past lingered, but so too did the enduring spirit of the Nile, a river whose waters, though once stilled, now flowed strong once more. And as Egypt looked toward the future, it did so with a renewed heart, beneath the unbroken gaze of the sun. Chapter 6: The Middle Kingdom's Glory. In the long story of Egypt, there are chapters of shining triumph and dark despair. The Middle Kingdom stands among the brightest. From the chaos of the first intermediate period, a new vision arose. The rulers of this age were pragmatic, wise, and deeply aware of Egypt's fragile balance. They had seen the cost of division and sought to heal their land, not through grand monuments alone, but through fair rule and steady hands. At the heart of this renewal stood Pharaoh Amenemhat III. A man of ambition and vision, Amenemhat was not born to royal blood, but he rose through strength and merit. When he claimed the throne around 1991 BCE, he understood that Egypt needed more than the image of divine kingship. It needed good governance. Amenemhat brought with him a fresh view of kingship. While still honoring the ancient gods, he presented himself as a leader for the people. His rule was guided by justice and practical wisdom. Amenemhat moved the royal court to a new city, Ichtawi, near the Fayum region. This shift placed the seat of power closer to the heart of Egypt's agricultural life and away from older political rivalries. From Ichtawi, Amenemhat worked to restore order and prosperity. His reign marked the beginning of the 12th dynasty, a line of rulers who would bring Egypt to new heights. Under these Middle Kingdom pharaohs, the focus was not only on building temples or waging war, but on strengthening the land itself. Laws were clarified. Taxes were collected fairly. Local governors, or nomarchs, were brought under tighter royal control, ending the dangerous independence they had enjoyed during Egypt's time of division. The pharaoh's justice reached every corner of the land. Trade flourished. The Nile once again bustled with boats carrying grain, papyrus, and luxury goods. Egypt's craftsmen produced beautiful works in stone, gold, and wood. The fields grew, full beneath the sun, and the people regained a sense of hope. In this new vision, the Middle Kingdom rulers forged a bond between the throne and the land. The lessons of the past were never forgotten. They had seen the Nile fail and the temples fall silent. Now, they ruled with care, ensuring that Ma'at, the sacred balance, remained strong. Walls and waters. With Egypt's heart restored, the Middle Kingdom kings turned their gaze outward. They knew that peace at home could not last without strong borders. The lands beyond Egypt were full of both danger and opportunity. To the south lay Nubia, rich in gold and other treasures. To the east, across the desert, wandered peoples whose intentions were less certain. To secure Egypt's future, the pharaohs built both walls and waters. One of their greatest achievements was the construction of a series of forts along Egypt's southern frontier. The Nile's flow through Nubia created a natural pathway for trade and invasion alike. The Middle Kingdom rulers fortified this route with mighty stone fortresses. Places like Semna and Uronati rose on the riverbanks, their thick walls standing guard over Egypt's southern gate. Soldiers stationed in these forts kept watch, ensuring that Nubian traders entered peacefully and that hostile forces were kept at bay. But the pharaohs sought more than defense. They sought wealth. Nubia's hills gleamed with gold, and its markets offered exotic goods, ivory, incense, ebony, and precious stones. Through careful campaigns and diplomacy, Egypt extended its influence deep into Nubia. Expeditions brought back caravans laden with treasure, enriching the royal court and temples. Closer to home, the Middle Kingdom rulers also mastered the waters. The Fayum region, near Ichtawi, became a center of agricultural innovation. Massive irrigation projects transformed its fertile lands. Canals were dug to control the flow of the Nile's waters, allowing for more reliable harvests. The Great Lake Moeris was linked to the river, serving as both a reservoir and a means of flood control. These works were not merely practical, they reflected the pharaoh's role as protector and provider. In a land where the Nile's gifts were life itself, controlling the waters was an act of divine stewardship. The canals and forts stood as symbols of a kingdom not content to rest on ancient glory. The Middle Kingdom was alive with purpose, its rulers shaping both land and border to serve Egypt's people. The Age of Literature. In the peace secured by strong rule and fortified borders, Egypt's spirit found new expression. The Middle Kingdom became an age of art and wisdom, where the voice of the nation blossomed as never before. Central to this cultural flowering was the written word. Writing had long been a tool of priests and scribes, used to record prayers, royal decrees, and temple rituals. But during the Middle Kingdom, literature began to flourish in new forms. Stories, teachings, and reflections were written not only for the gods, but for the people and for the ages. Scribes, held in high esteem, became the keepers of Egypt's voice. They recorded tales of adventure, love, and morality. Works like The Tale of Sinuhe told of an official's journey through foreign lands and his longing for home, a story that spoke to the heart of many Egyptians. Other writings, such as The Instruction of Amenemhat, offered guidance on leadership and life, blending practical advice with reflections on fate and faith. Poetry also found new life. Hymns to the gods celebrated creation and the beauty of the natural world. Love poems captured tender emotions, giving voice to personal feelings once left unspoken in official texts. Through these writings, the thoughts and dreams of ancient Egyptians were preserved in ink. Importantly, this age saw the spread of writing beyond the walls of temples. Education flourished. Schools for scribes trained new generations in the art of hieroglyphs and hieratic script. Literacy, though still limited to a privileged few, became a path to power and prestige. A talented scribe could rise to serve at the pharaoh's court, shaping the kingdom's records and culture. The Middle Kingdom's literary achievements left a lasting legacy. In its stories, teachings, and poems, Egypt's soul was captured, not in the cold stone of monuments, but in the living words that carried its spirit across time. Through these writings, we still hear the echoes of a land that loved wisdom as deeply as it honored the gods. The looming shadow. Yet even in this time of peace and glory, the Middle Kingdom was not without its shadows. Across the eastern desert, beyond the familiar borders of Egypt, new peoples stirred. Among them were the Hyksos, strangers from the lands of Western Asia. These newcomers brought with them strange ways and powerful tools. Chief among these were horses and chariots, unknown in Egypt at the time. At first, contact was limited to trade. Hyksos merchants crossed into Egypt, exchanging goods and knowledge. But as Egypt's wealth became known, so too did its temptations. Over time, waves of Hyksos settlers began to enter the eastern delta. Some came as traders, others as raiders. They built settlements, blending their customs with those of the land. The pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom were aware of this growing presence. They reinforced Egypt's eastern defenses, building walls and watchtowers. Yet the true nature of the threat was not fully understood. The Hyksos mastery of horses and chariots gave them a mobility and power unknown to Egypt's traditional armies. In time, this advantage would change the balance of power. For now, the Middle Kingdom stood strong. But in the whispers of the desert winds and the rising smoke from distant camps, a warning could be heard. Egypt's rulers faced a choice: to prepare for the new world taking shape beyond their borders, or to trust in the walls and waters they had so carefully built. As the sun set on the Middle Kingdom's greatest days, its light still shone brightly. Yet in the east, the shadow of a new age began to grow, a test of Egypt's might and resilience yet to come. Chapter 7: The Hyksos, Invasion. For centuries, Egypt had stood as a land apart, a kingdom framed by desert and sea, guarded by its natural barriers, and unified beneath the rule of its god-kings. Foreign invaders were a distant threat, their shadows seldom crossing the Nile. But no wall can hold forever, and no land remains untouched by the tides of change. In time, the eastern winds brought a new and unfamiliar force to Egypt's shores: the Hyksos. They came first as merchants, travelers, and settlers from the lands beyond the Sinai, Canaanite peoples, whose origins lay in the wider world of the Near East. Their language was strange to Egyptian ears, their dress unfamiliar, yet they brought with them goods the Egyptians desired and skills that intrigued them. Chief among these were horses, fast and strong, and the chariot, a weapon of war unlike anything the Nile had seen. Trade soon became presence. Settlements of these newcomers grew, especially in the fertile lands of the eastern delta. The Egyptian state, focused on its own affairs and wearied by the fading strength of the Middle Kingdom, allowed these groups to take root. But what began as peaceful coexistence soon shifted. The Hyksos were not merely traders, they were ambitious, capable of forging alliances and commanding armies. They adapted swiftly, learning the ways of the land even as they reshaped it. At some uncertain moment in the 17th century BCE, the balance tipped. The Hyksos rose in force, their chariots cutting through Egypt's aging defenses. The kings of Egypt, long unchallenged, found themselves powerless before this new military might. The Delta fell, and with it, the heart of the northern kingdom. The Hyksos crowned their own rulers as pharaohs. For the first time in history, Egypt was under the rule of foreigners. The Hyksos kings styled themselves as the rulers of the two lands, adopting the titles and ceremonies of their Egyptian predecessors. Yet they remained outsiders, their presence a bitter mark upon the land. Temples stood silent in parts of the kingdom. Loyal Egyptians watched in grief as their sacred land bowed before these kings of foreign lands. The world had changed, and the long struggle to reclaim Egypt had begun. The city of Avaris. At the center of Hyksos power rose the city of Avaris. Located in the eastern delta near the great branch of the Nile, Avaris became a thriving capital, a place where old and new mingled, sometimes uneasily. The Hyksos rulers sought to legitimize their rule. They adorned themselves with Egyptian regalia, built temples to Egyptian gods, and employed scribes and artisans to shape an image of continuity. Yet beneath this surface, Avaris was a city transformed. The Hyksos brought with them knowledge that would reshape Egypt's military and economy. Their use of the composite bow, more powerful than Egyptian designs, gave their soldiers an edge in battle. Their chariots, drawn by swift horses, became the terror of the open plain. Fast, mobile platforms from which arrows and spears rained down upon foot soldiers. In time, Egyptian forces would adopt these same tools, but for now, they were a symbol of Hyksos dominance. Economically, Avaris thrived. The Hyksos maintained extensive trade networks that linked Egypt to the wider world. Goods flowed through the city, cedar from Lebanon, silver from the Aegean, and exotic wares from as far as Mesopotamia. The markets bustled with activity, and wealth poured into Hyksos coffers. For some Egyptians, life under the new rulers meant opportunity and profit. Others saw only the stain of occupation. The city itself reflected this duality. Egyptian and Foreign customs intertwined. Temples stood beside foreign shrines. Egyptian artisans crafted goods for Hyksos elites, while foreign motifs appeared in local art. Avaris was both Egyptian and not, a city of new rulers in an ancient land. From its strong walls, the Hyksos kings watched over their domain, wary of the unrest simmering in the south. For all their efforts to appear as rightful pharaohs, the Hyksos could not erase the truth of their conquest. They remained foreign in the eyes of many Egyptians, and in Thebes, far to the south, a spark of resistance began to glow, a spark that would soon ignite a war for the soul of Egypt. Resistance in Thebes. While the Hyksos ruled from Avaris, the city of Thebes remained a bastion of native Egyptian power. In this southern stronghold, a line of Theban pharaohs refused to bow to foreign kings. Their authority was limited at first, their resources stretched thin, but in their hearts burned the fierce determination to free Egypt from Hyksos rule. The early stages of resistance were cautious. The Theban rulers maintained an uneasy peace, paying tribute to Avaris while quietly rebuilding their strength. They gathered loyal soldiers, trained new scribes, and restored temples to rally public support. The voice of the gods spoke clearly, in Thebes. Egypt must be whole again. Tensions rose with each passing year. Skirmishes broke out along the borderlands. Theban envoys returned from Avaris with tales of insult and injustice. Among the Theban pharaohs, Seqenenre emerged as a bold leader. His defiance was clear, his resolve unshaken. Under his rule, open conflict began. The war to reclaim Egypt had truly started. It was a brutal, grinding struggle. The Thebans faced a formidable enemy. The Hyksos held superior weapons and the might of their chariots. Yet the Thebans fought with unmatched spirit. Battles raged across the Nile Valley. Fortresses changed hands. Fields burned, and the land groaned beneath the weight of war. The war stretched over decades, passing from father to son. Seqenenre was struck down in battle. His body later found bearing the marks of violent death, a silent testament to the ferocity of the fight. His son, Ahmose, took up the cause, pressing the campaign northward with renewed vigor. Each victory brought hope. Each setback hardened Theban resolve. Through these long years of blood and sacrifice, Thebes became a symbol of resistance. Its people endured, its rulers inspired. The gods of Egypt, it was said, watched over Thebes with favor. And from the halls of its temples to the ranks of its armies, one truth rang clear: Egypt would not be surrendered to foreign kings. The victory of Ahmose. In the end, it was Ahmose I, a young and determined pharaoh, who would lead Egypt to final victory. Inheriting the struggle from his forebears, Ahmose possessed both the vision of a statesman and the courage of a warrior. Under his command, Theban forces launched a decisive campaign to drive the Hyksos from the land once and for all. Ahmose had learned from the long years of war. He equipped his armies with chariots and improved weaponry. He forged alliances and secured vital resources. As the campaign advanced, city after city fell to Theban hands. The heartland of Egypt rallied behind its native king. The final blow came at Avaris, the great Hyksos capital, once a symbol of foreign power, now stood besieged. The battle was fierce. Walls crumbled, streets ran red, and the cry of freedom rose above the din of war. At last, Avaris fell. The Hyksos survivors fled, pursued into the deserts beyond Egypt's borders. With this victory, Ahmose reclaimed Egypt's independence. The yoke of the Hyksos was broken. Temples resounded with hymns of thanks. The Nile flowed once more beneath the rule of a native pharaoh. Egypt had won back its soul. Ahmose's triumph marked the dawn of a new era, the New Kingdom. From the ashes of foreign rule, Egypt rose stronger than before. The lessons of the Hyksos invasion would not be forgotten. Egypt's armies would be rebuilt, its borders secured. The days of isolation were over. The land of the Nile would now meet the world with eyes wide open and a heart unbroken. As the sun set over a liberated land, the people of Egypt looked to the future with hope. The spirit of the two lands had endured, and beneath the stars, the name of Pharaoh once again carried the promise of unity, strength, and enduring light. Chapter 8. The New Kingdom begins. The long and bitter struggle to free Egypt from the Hyksos had changed the land forever. In the fires of war, a new spirit had been forged, one of resilience, ambition, and hard-won strength. The kings who rose from Thebes carried this spirit with them as they stepped into the dawn of a new era. No longer would Egypt be content to guard its borders alone. The age of the warrior pharaohs had begun. These rulers, shaped by battle, understood the value of readiness and power. They had seen the cost of weakness and the devastation of foreign rule. Now, they embraced a new vision for Egypt, one that extended beyond the green valley of the Nile. The New Kingdom was not simply a return to the old ways. It was a bold step forward, an age of expansion and empire. Ahmose III, the liberator of Egypt, laid the foundation. His successors, Amenhotep I, Thutmos I, and the mighty Thutmos III, would build upon it. These pharaohs restructured Egypt's military, incorporating the lessons learned from their Hyksos foes. Chariots became a central part of Egyptian warfare, alongside disciplined infantry and skilled archers. The army grew in size and professionalism, ready to project Egypt's might beyond its traditional boundaries. The drive for expansion was fueled by both security and ambition. The deserts no longer seemed enough to protect the Nile. The pharaohs sought to control the lands beyond them, creating buffer zones and securing vital trade routes. At the same time, conquest brought immense wealth, tribute from foreign lands, prized goods, and captives who served the Egyptian elite. Campaigns were launched into Nubia to the south and deep into the Levant to the northeast. The warrior pharaohs led these expeditions personally, their names and deeds recorded in triumphal inscriptions. Each victory strengthened Egypt's position and filled its coffers. This was Egypt's greatest age, the New Kingdom, a time when pharaohs stood not only as divine kings, but as world rulers. Their power resonated across the ancient world, and the legacy of their ambition would shape Egypt's destiny for generations to come. The temples of Karnak. As Egypt's armies marched, abroad, at home, a different kind of monument rose, one not forged in battle, but in stone and spirit. On the eastern bank of the Nile, near the city of Thebes, the vast temple complex of Karnak began its ascent into history. Here, pharaohs sought to honor the gods and display their own divine connection, creating a spiritual heart for the new kingdom. Karnak was more than a temple. It was a living symbol of Egypt's renewed power and piety. Dedicated primarily to Amun-Ra, the chief god of the new kingdom, the complex grew with each reign. Every pharaoh who contributed sought to leave a mark, an inscription, a column, a grand gateway. The result was a sprawling forest of stone, where light and shadow played among towering pillars and endless halls. The central feature of Karnak was its great hypostyle hall, a monumental space filled with massive columns carved with hieroglyphs. and images of pharaohs communing with the gods. Walking through its cool, shaded paths, one could feel the weight of eternity pressing gently down. Here, the divine and the mortal met in a dance of light and stone. Karnak was also a stage for Egypt's most sacred ceremonies. During the annual Opet festival, statues of Amun, Mut, and Khonsu were carried in procession from Karnak to the nearby Temple of Luxor, their passage witnessed by throngs of faithful Egyptians. These rituals reinforced the pharaoh's role as the chosen intermediary between the gods and the people, a role that was both political and deeply spiritual. For the warrior pharaohs, Karnak served as a testament to their victories and their piety. Inscriptions celebrated military triumphs alongside offerings to the gods. Tribute from conquered lands funded further expansions, linking Egypt's imperial ambitions with its sacred duties. Through centuries of change, Karnak remained the spiritual heart of Egypt. Its stones whispered of devotion and power, of a kingdom that had risen from conquest to glory. Even today, as the winds of time sweep through its ruins, the echoes of that age still linger beneath the sunlit sky. The empire beyond the Nile. With Egypt's heart secure and its spirit renewed, the pharaohs turned their gaze outward. The new kingdom's armies became instruments of expansion, carrying the banner of Egypt far beyond the familiar banks of the Nile. The age of empire had truly arrived. In the south, campaigns into Nubia extended Egypt's control deep into the gold-rich lands beyond the First Cataract. Fortresses were built to secure the region, and Nubian princes were brought to the Egyptian court, trained in Egyptian ways to ensure loyalty. The flow of Nubian gold became a vital source of wealth for the pharaohs, funding both military campaigns and monumental construction. To the northeast, the lands of Canaan and Syria beckoned. These regions were rich in timber, metals, and trade routes, but they were also fiercely contested. City-states vied for power, and the great empires of Mesopotamia loomed beyond. Into this complex world marched the armies of Thutmos III, often called the Napoleon of ancient Egypt. Through a series of brilliant campaigns, Thutmos III secured Egypt's dominance over much of the Levant. His victories were commemorated on the walls of Karnak, where detailed records listed the cities conquered and the tribute exacted. From cedar wood and lapis lazuli to exotic animals and skilled artisans, the spoils of empire enriched Egypt's court beyond measure. Tribute flowed into Thebes, carried on the backs of envoys and captives. Foreign princes pledged loyalty to Pharaoh, their sons sent to Egypt as hostages to ensure compliance. This web of alliances and vassal states expanded Egypt's influence and opened new channels of trade. Yet conquest was not merely about wealth, it was about prestige. The pharaohs of the new kingdom viewed themselves as rulers of a universal order, tasked with maintaining Ma'at, the cosmic balance, across the known world. Their victories were seen as acts of divine justice, their empire a reflection of the God's will. Through these endeavors, Egypt stood at the center of an interconnected ancient world, its influence reaching far beyond its desert borders. The new kingdom had transformed Egypt into an empire, a beacon of power and culture in a turbulent age. A people transformed. As Egypt's reach expanded, so too did its horizons. The land of the Nile, once relatively insular, now found itself at the crossroads of a dynamic ancient world. New goods, new ideas, and new peoples flowed into Egypt, subtly transforming its society and culture. Foreign artisans and craftsmen brought fresh styles and techniques. Syrian and Canaanite influences appeared in jewelry, furniture, and pottery. The designs of chariots and weapons reflected innovations from abroad, adopted and refined by Egyptian hands. Trade introduced a wealth of new materials: lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, incense from Punt, cedar from Lebanon, and silver from Anatolia enriched Egyptian life. Luxuries once rare became more common in elite circles, adorning palaces and temples. The flow of people was equally significant. Captives from conquered lands entered Egypt as servants or laborers. Foreign merchants settled in Egyptian cities, bringing their customs and beliefs. The court itself became a cosmopolitan space, where envoys from distant lands mingled with Egyptian officials. These exchanges influenced Egyptian thought as well. Religious ideas blended, with foreign deities finding places alongside traditional gods. Stories and myths from other cultures circulated in Egyptian form. The art of diplomacy flourished as pharaohs navigated the complex web of international relations through marriage alliances and treaty negotiations. For ordinary Egyptians, the changes were both visible and subtle. Markets offered a wider array of goods. The sight of foreign faces became more common. Stories of pharaohs' distant conquests stirred pride and curiosity. Yet through all this transformation, the core of Egyptian identity endured. The land of the Nile remained the heart of the kingdom, its rhythms tied to the annual flood and the eternal cycle of life and death. The temples of Karnak and Luxor anchored the people's faith, reminding them of their place in the cosmos. The New Kingdom was an era of both continuity and change. Egypt stood stronger, richer, and more connected than ever before. Its people had embraced new influences without losing sight of their ancient roots. As the sun set on each day of this golden age, the land of the Nile shone brightly, centered, confident, and ready for whatever lay beyond the horizon. Chapter 9. Hatshepsut, the woman who would be king. In the long tapestry of Egypt's history, woven with the lives of countless kings, one figure stands apart, a woman who dared to claim the mantle of Pharaoh. Her name was Hatshepsut. In an age when power flowed through the hands of men, Hatshepsut defied convention, wrapped herself in the symbols of kingship, and ruled Egypt with wisdom and vision. Born into the royal family of the 18th dynasty, Hatshepsut was the daughter of Pharaoh Thutmos III. She was married to her half-brother Thutmos II, becoming his queen. For a time, she occupied the traditional role of royal wife, guiding courtly life and supporting the pharaoh's reign. But fate soon shifted. Thutmos II died young, leaving behind a son, Thutmos III, still too young to rule. In this moment of uncertainty, Hatshepsut stepped forward. At first, she acted as regent, ruling in her stepson's name. Yet as her influence grew, so too did her ambition. Within a few years, Hatshepsut made a bold and unprecedented move. She declared herself pharaoh, not merely queen or regent, but sovereign ruler of Egypt. This transformation was no simple matter. The role of pharaoh was steeped in tradition and divine symbolism. To claim it, Hatshepsut adopted the full regalia of kingship. She wore the false beard of pharaohs, the royal headdress, and the kilt of a male ruler. In inscriptions and statues, she was depicted with the strength and authority of a king. Yet beneath these outward forms, Hatshepsut's rule was marked not by war or conquest, but by peace and prosperity. Her reign brought stability to Egypt, allowing its people to thrive. Trade flourished, temples rose, and the land prospered under her steady hand. Hatshepsut understood the power of image and legacy. Through art, architecture, and carefully crafted inscriptions, she shaped a vision of her reign that would endure. She was a builder, a stateswoman, and a ruler who honored the gods and guided her people with wisdom. In a world of kings, she became the woman who would be king, an extraordinary chapter in Egypt's timeless story. The voyage to Punt, among the many achievements of Hatshepsut's reign, one shines with a sense of adventure and mystery. The Great Expedition to the Land of Punt. This voyage, undertaken in pursuit of exotic riches and distant alliances, remains one of the most famous episodes of her rule, immortalized on the walls of her grand temple. Punt, known to the Egyptians as the Land of the Gods, lay far to the south, beyond the Red Sea. Its exact location remains a mystery even today, lost to the shifting sands of time. Yet ancient texts spoke of its wonders: fragrant incense, rare woods, gold, ivory, and strange animals unseen in Egypt. Determined to renew Egypt's ties with this fabled land, Hatshepsut ordered the construction of a fleet. Skilled shipbuilders crafted sturdy vessels, their hulls designed to brave the open sea. Sailors and merchants were gathered, their mission clear: to sail to Punt, establish friendly relations, and return with treasures to grace Egypt's temples and palaces. The voyage was a triumph of planning and daring. Guided by the stars and the wisdom of seasoned pilots, the ships crossed the Red Sea and reached Punt's distant shores. There, they were welcomed by the local rulers, who exchanged gifts and pledged goodwill. The Egyptian envoys marveled at what they found. Scenes carved on the walls of Hatshepsut's mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari depict the riches they brought back. Bundles of myrrh, ebony logs, live baboons, and exotic plants. The images also show the people of Punt, men and women with distinctive features and dress, their appearance forever captured in stone. The return to Egypt was celebrated with great ceremony. The treasures of Punt were offered to the gods, particularly Amun-Ra, whose favor Hatshepsut sought to secure. The success of the voyage reinforced her image as a ruler favored by the divine and skilled in statecraft. Through this daring expedition, Hatshepsut not only enriched her kingdom, but expanded its horizons. She reminded her people that Egypt was not an isolated land, but part of a wider world of wonder and possibility, a message that resonated long after her reign had ended. Temples in the cliffs. Of all the legacies Hatshepsut left behind, none is more breathtaking than her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari. Nestled against the cliffs of western Thebes, this architectural masterpiece stands as a testament to her vision. A place where nature and stone blend in perfect harmony, creating a monument to eternity. Designed by her trusted architect Senenmut, the temple was unlike anything Egypt had seen. Its grand terraces rose in 3 tiers, linked by wide ramps and framed by colonnades of slender columns. The pale limestone echoed the colors of the surrounding cliffs, making the structure seem almost a part of the landscape itself. From the temple's forecourt, one could gaze across the Nile to the fertile valley below, a reminder of the life-giving river that sustained Egypt. Within the temple's walls, scenes of Hatshepsut's reign came to life. The voyage to Punt, offerings to the gods, and the divine birth of the queen herself, linking her rule to the will of Amun-Ra. The temple was not merely a place of worship, but a carefully crafted message. Through its design and decoration, Hatshepsut asserted her legitimacy as pharaoh and her devotion to the gods. The alignment of the structure with the winter solstice sun further reinforced its sacred nature, connecting her memory with the eternal cycles of the heavens. Deir el-Bahari also served as a center of ritual. Priests tended to the cult of Hatshepsut, ensuring that offerings were made and her spirit honored. The temple's beauty and innovation inspired later generations, influencing the architecture of future pharaohs. Even today, as the centuries have worn away its brilliance, the temple remains a place of awe. Visitors stand beneath its towering columns and gaze upon its faded reliefs, feeling the quiet power of a ruler who dared to dream beyond the ordinary. In Stone and Shadow, Deir el-Bahari tells the story of a queen who reached for immortality, and, in doing so, touched the heart of Egypt itself. The erased legacy, yet greatness often stirs envy, and Hatshepsut's bold reign was no exception. After her death, a deliberate effort was made to erase her memory, a campaign of destruction aimed at removing her from Egypt's royal history. It is believed that this effort was led by her successor, Thutmose III, the very stepson whose throne she had once safeguarded. Whether driven by personal resentment or political necessity, the campaign unfolded with chilling precision. Images of Hatshepsut were chiseled from temple walls. Statues were toppled or defaced. Inscriptions bearing her name were scratched away. The goal was clear: to rewrite the past, to present a seamless line of male kingship unmarred by the reign of a female pharaoh. For a time, this erasure seemed complete. Hatshepsut's name faded from public memory, her accomplishments buried beneath the sands of forgotten history. But stone endures where memory fails. The very monuments meant to glorify her proved her salvation. Though damaged, the reliefs of Deir el-Bahari survived. Fragments of statues were unearthed. Inscriptions long hidden came to light. In modern times, scholars piece together the story of Hatshepsut, reconstructing a life of courage, vision, and achievement. Today, she is recognized not as an interloper, but as one of Egypt's greatest rulers, a woman who shaped her world and left an indelible mark upon it. Her story rises once more from the sands, a testament to the enduring power of truth and the resilience of those who dare to defy convention. In the quiet halls of her temple and the pages of history, Hatshepsut's voice echoes still, strong, clear, and timeless. Chapter 10: Thutmose III and the Warrior Empire. In the grand halls of Karnak, beneath the towering columns that reach toward the heavens, a young pharaoh began to take his rightful place. Thutmose III, born of royal blood, had long stood in the shadow of Hatshepsut, the remarkable queen who had ruled Egypt with vision and grace. For years he had been pharaoh in name but not in full power. Now, with her passing, the throne was truly his. The transition was not marked by vengeance, but by purpose. Thutmose III was a man forged in discipline. Raised in the ways of kingship and war, he understood that Egypt's future lay not only in stability, but in strength. The lessons of the Hyksos invasion remained fresh in the minds of the court. A complacent Egypt could be made vulnerable. To ensure its security, the pharaoh must project power far beyond the borders of the Nile. Thutmose III embraced this vision with unmatched energy. He reorganized the army, blending the hard-won experience of his generals with innovations in weaponry and strategy. The chariot, once an instrument of Hyksos dominance, now served Egypt with deadly precision. Archers trained to strike swiftly and accurately. Foot soldiers drilled in coordinated maneuvers. But Thutmose III was more than a warrior. He was a ruler with a deep understanding of statecraft. He knew that conquest alone would not secure Egypt's place in the world. Alliances, tribute, and diplomacy would all play their part. Yet first, the pharaoh would take to the field, a king leading his men as no mere figurehead, but as a commander whose presence inspired loyalty and fear. The campaigns that followed would extend Egypt's reach farther than ever before. From the deserts of Nubia to the hills of Canaan and the great cities of Syria, Thutmose III led his forces across the ancient world. His reign marked the height of Egypt's imperial power, a time when the pharaoh's word carried weight across the lands, and the sun of Egypt shone brightly on distant shores. The Battle of Megiddo, of all Thutmose III's military triumphs, none captured the imagination quite like the Battle of Megiddo, a campaign that would echo through history as a model of strategy and leadership. In the early years of his sole reign, a coalition of rebellious vassals gathered in the region of Canaan. At their head stood the king of Kadesh, who sought to challenge Egypt's dominance in the Levant. The city of Megiddo, with its formidable fortifications and strategic position, became the focal point of this resistance. Thutmose III responded with swift determination. He personally led a well-prepared army northward, crossing the Sinai with remarkable speed. The campaign was meticulously planned. Supply lines were secured, and scouts provided critical intelligence. Yet, as the Egyptian forces approached Megiddo, the pharaoh faced a choice. 3 routes led to the city, 2 broad and safe, 1 narrow and risky. Thutmose III, trusting both his judgment and the element of surprise, chose the difficult path. Through the narrow Aruna Pass, his forces advanced in single file, vulnerable to ambush. But the gamble paid off. The coalition leaders had not anticipated such boldness. The Egyptian army emerged swiftly and in strength, catching the defenders unprepared. The battle that followed was fierce. Egyptian chariots swept across the plains, archers loosed volleys of arrows, and infantry pressed the attack. The enemy forces, though numerous, faltered under the pharaoh's relentless assault. The defenders retreated behind the walls of Megiddo, but the siege had only begun. For 7 long months, Thutmose III maintained the siege with precision and patience. His forces cut off supplies, constructed siege works, and wore down the defenders. In time, the city surrendered. The victory was total. The Battle of Megiddo was more than a military triumph. It demonstrated the pharaoh's genius as a commander and his understanding of psychological warfare. The loyalty of Egypt's vassals was reaffirmed. News of the victory spread across the region, reinforcing the image of an Egypt both mighty and unyielding. Centuries later, the name Megiddo would resonate even beyond history, finding echoes in tales of apocalyptic struggle. But in Thutmose III's time, it stood as a beacon of Egyptian dominance, a testament to a pharaoh who led from the front, whose courage and cunning reshaped the ancient world. The spoils of victory on the battlefield brought more than glory. For Egypt, it ushered in an era of unparalleled wealth and influence. Tribute poured into Thebes from lands near and far, offerings of gold, precious stones, fine textiles, and rare animals. The spoils of Thutmose III's campaigns transformed the royal court, infusing it with splendor unmatched in earlier times. Caravans laden with goods arrived in steady streams. From Nubia came gold, gleaming ingots and fine jewelry that adorned temples and royal regalia. From the Levant arrived lapis lazuli, a deep blue stone prized for its beauty and rarity. Timber from Lebanon provided the wood needed for ships and grand constructions. Exotic creatures, monkeys, leopards, and rare birds graced the gardens of the pharaoh. Foreign artisans and craftsmen found their way to Egypt, bringing new techniques and styles. The fusion of cultures enriched Egyptian art and architecture, furniture, jewelry, and decorative objects reflected influences from across the empire, blending the familiar with the exotic. The court of Thutmose III glittered with this new wealth. Festivals and ceremonies grew more elaborate. Offerings to the gods increased in both quantity and splendor. The temples of Karnak and Luxor were adorned with precious materials, their sanctuaries filled with objects of devotion. But the influx of tribute served a deeper purpose. It reinforced the pharaoh's divine role as the maintainer of Ma'at, the cosmic order. Wealth from foreign lands was not merely for personal indulgence. It symbolized Egypt's rightful place as the heart of a harmonious world. Each tribute carried with it a message of submission and reverence, a recognition of Egypt's central role in the divine scheme. Through this blend of power and piety, Thutmose III secured not only his own legacy, but the enduring strength of the new kingdom. His reign set a standard for future rulers. A golden age where Egypt stood at the pinnacle of ancient civilization, its influence radiating outward in all directions, balancing power and faith. Though renowned as a warrior, Thutmose III was also a builder, a patron of the gods, and a ruler deeply attuned to the spiritual life of his people. He understood that military might must be balanced with devotion, that the heart of Egypt was not found solely on the battlefield, but in the sanctity of its temples and the faith of its citizens. Throughout his reign, Thutmose III embarked on ambitious building projects. At Karnak, he expanded the great temple of Amun, adding new halls, obelisks, and richly decorated reliefs. His inscriptions celebrated both his conquests and his piety, presenting the pharaoh as a servant of the gods, whose victories upheld the divine order. Temples across Egypt were restored and enriched. In Nubia, new sanctuaries rose to honor both Egyptian and local deities, fostering loyalty and integration. The pharaoh's building program was not driven by vanity, but by a profound understanding of Egypt's spiritual foundations. Thutmose III also supported the priesthood, ensuring that rituals were conducted with proper reverence and grandeur. He endowed temples with land and resources, securing their role as centers of both worship and community life. In doing so, he strengthened the bonds between the throne and the divine, a relationship that lay at the heart of Egyptian identity. Yet, amid the splendor of his reign, Thutmose III remained a ruler mindful of legacy. His inscriptions speak not only of battles won, but of harmony maintained, of a land flourishing under the guidance of its living god-king. He balanced the demands of empire with the sacred duty to uphold Ma'at, ensuring that Egypt's spiritual and temporal power reached its zenith. As the sun set on his long and storied reign, Thutmose III left behind a kingdom transformed, a land of unrivaled strength, bound together by faith and guided by a ruler who had mastered the art of kingship. His legacy would inspire generations, a golden chapter in the timeless story of the Nile. Chapter 11: Akhenaten and the Heretic King. The ancient gods of Egypt had watched over the land for thousands of years. Their temples lined the banks of the Nile, their names spoken in every home. Amun, Ra, Osiris, Isis. Each held a place in the grand cycle of life and death, sky and earth. The pharaoh was their earthly link, protector of Ma'at, the sacred balance. Yet amid this timeless order, a single man rose with a vision that would shake the foundations of Egypt's faith. Akhenaten, born as Amenhotep IV, the young prince, ascended to the throne in a time of wealth and power. Egypt's empire stretched across lands near and far. The temples of Amun towered in Thebes, rich with offerings. But within Amenhotep IV stirred a restless spirit, whether driven by deep conviction or a desire to wrest power from the entrenched priesthood. He embraced a bold new path. In the early years of his reign, Amenhotep IV began to elevate the god Aten, the sun disk, as supreme. Unlike the traditional Gods. Aten was not represented as a man or beast, but as a glowing orb whose rays touched all life. This was not a god hidden in temple sanctuaries, but one visible to all across sky and earth. The sun's light became a living presence, a divine force that needed no intermediaries. Soon, Amenhotep IV took a fateful step. He changed his name to Akhenaten, effective for Aten, declaring his devotion publicly. The old gods were sidelined. Temples to Amun were closed or repurposed. Inscriptions were altered. The pharaoh himself became the chief priest of the new faith, offering prayers beneath the open sky. This radical vision was breathtaking in scope. For a civilization rooted in tradition, such a shift was seismic. Akhenaten envisioned a simpler, more direct connection between humanity and the divine, a universe illuminated by the sun's boundless light. But behind the spiritual ideals lay political calculation. By elevating Aten, Akhenaten also diminished the powerful Amun priesthood, consolidating religious and political authority under the crown. In doing so, he courted both reverence and resentment. Egypt, a land of countless gods and unbroken customs, now stood at the edge of a great transformation. Its people called to gaze upward toward the radiant sun, even as the shadows of dissent began to stir below. The city of Amarna. With his new faith came a new vision for Egypt itself. Akhenaten chose to leave Thebes, the seat of old power, and create a fresh beginning. On the eastern bank of the Nile, amid the cliffs and wide desert plain, he founded a new capital, Akhetaten, Horizon of the Aten. Today, we know it as Amarna. The city rose with astonishing speed. Palaces, temples, and homes sprang from the sands, all dedicated to the worship of Aten. At its heart stood the great temple of the Aten, an open-air sanctuary where the sun's rays fell directly upon altars and worshippers. There were no dark inner chambers, no towering statues of gods. Light itself was the offering and the blessing. Amarna was more than a place of faith. It became a stage for a new style of art and life. Freed from the strict formalism of earlier dynasties, artists embraced a startling realism. In wall carvings and painted scenes, the royal family appeared not as distant icons, but as deeply human figures. Akhenaten and his queen Nefertiti were shown in tender moments, playing with their daughters, embracing beneath the sun's beams. Wrinkles, folds of flesh, and affectionate gestures replaced the stiff perfection of earlier portrayals. This new art revealed a pharaoh both visionary and intensely personal. The sun's rays, ending in tiny hands, touched the faces of the royal family, as if blessing them directly. The world of Amarna felt alive, full of light, movement, and emotion. Life in the city reflected this openness. Poets and craftsmen flourished. Music and learning thrived. Foreign envoys came and went, bringing gifts and seeking favor. Yet beneath the surface shimmered unease. Many Egyptians viewed the new faith with suspicion. The absence of familiar gods and rituals left deep voids in daily life. Still, for a time, Akhenaten's dream held sway. Amid the sunlit courtyards and open temples, a new Egypt flickered into being, one where light was sacred, and the pharaoh stood bathed in its eternal glow. The cost of revolution, but revolutions often come with a price. As Akhenaten's devotion to Aten deepened, so too did his intolerance for the old ways. Temples to Amun and other gods were shuttered. Statues and inscriptions were defaced. The powerful Amun priesthood, once Egypt's spiritual backbone, found itself stripped of influence and wealth. This religious upheaval bred unrest. Across Egypt, priests, officials, and common folk alike resisted the changes. Centuries of worship could not be erased in a generation. Festivals once central to communal life vanished. The gods of the Nile, the desert, and the stars, once honored in every village, were declared obsolete. In the provinces, loyalty frayed. Governors and priests navigated a perilous line between obedience to the pharaoh and allegiance to their traditions. In distant temples, some rites continued in secret. The bonds that held Egypt together, a shared faith and a sacred order, began to weaken. Akhenaten, consumed by his vision, seemed indifferent to the growing discontent. He withdrew deeper into the life of Amarna, surrounding himself with loyal followers and family. His court became a world apart, one devoted entirely to the Eten. Meanwhile, the empire's borders began to tremble. Vassal states in the Levant grew restless. Foreign rulers, sensing weakness, withheld tribute or sought alliances elsewhere. Egypt's military, neglected amid the focus on religious reform, struggled to maintain control. At home, the economy, strained under the weight of temple closures and shifting priorities, the flow of wealth diminished. Ordinary Egyptians, caught between loyalty to the pharaoh and devotion to the old gods, faced uncertainty. The cost of revolution was mounting. The spiritual heart of Egypt, rooted in an intricate web of beliefs and practices, could not be so easily replaced. Beneath the sunlit streets of Amarna, shadows gathered, signaling a nation poised on the edge of fracture. The unraveling. As the years of Akhenaten's reign wore on, the strains became impossible to ignore. The empire's outer provinces slipped further from control. Reports of lost territories and rebellious vassals reached the pharaoh's court, met with silence or insufficient action. Diplomats sent urgent pleas for military support, their words falling into a void of religious preoccupation. At home, discontent turned to quiet defiance. In cities far from Amarna, the names of old gods crept back into prayers and rituals. The people of Egypt, weary of enforced devotion to a single deity, began to yearn for the familiar comfort of their ancestral faith. Even within the royal circle, cracks appeared. While Nefertiti remained a steadfast partner in Akhenaten's vision, others whispered doubts. The isolation of the pharaoh's court bred intrigue and uncertainty. Succession became a murky question, with potential heirs shrouded in mystery. Then, in the 12th year of his reign, perhaps earlier, Nefertiti vanished from the record. Whether through death or political maneuvering, her absence marked a turning point. Akhenaten grew more reclusive, his health reportedly failing. The city of Amarna, once vibrant with hope, began to fade. When Akhenaten died around 1336 BCE, he left behind a broken Egypt. The empire's borders were weakened. Its unity had frayed. The grand experiment of Atenism hung in the balance, sustained only by a fragile and shrinking circle of loyalists. In the wake of his death, a swift reversal began. His immediate successors, first Smenkhkare, then the young Tutankhaten, moved to restore the old order. Tutankhaten soon changed his name to Tutankhamun, signaling a return to the worship of Amun and the pantheon of traditional gods. Amarna was abandoned, its temples and palaces left to the sands. The old gods reclaimed their places. The memory of Akhenaten was deliberately obscured, his images defaced, his name struck from official lists. Yet stone endures where memory falters. The ruins of Amarna and the art that once flourished there preserve glimpses of this extraordinary chapter. In the bold rays of the Aten and the tender scenes of a royal family, we see the vision of a pharaoh who dared to reshape the world. Akhenaten's revolution ultimately unraveled, but its echoes remain, a testament to the enduring power of faith, the dangers of unchecked zeal, and the fragile balance between tradition and change. Chapter 12. Tutankhamun and the Return to Tradition. The winds of change swept through Egypt as the sun set on the reign of Akhenaten. The radical devotion to the sun disk Aten had left the land fractured and weary. Temples to the old gods lay silent, their priests disgraced or in hiding. The outer reaches of the empire had slipped beyond Egypt's grasp, and within the hearts of the people, longing stirred for familiar gods, for the rhythms of the past, for stability. Into this fragile moment came a boy. Tutankhaten, soon to be known as Tutankhamun, ascended the throne as a child of around 9 years old. Born during the later years of Akhenaten's reign, Tutankhamun had grown up amid uncertainty and whispered dissent. He was likely a son of Akhenaten, though mysteries still cloud the details of his birth and early life. The burden of kingship now rested upon his small shoulders. But Tutankhamun would not rule alone. The true architects of Egypt's return to tradition were his powerful advisors, chief among them I, a seasoned courtier, and Horemheb, a formidable general. Together, they guided the boy king through the turbulent task of healing a wounded nation. One of the first and most symbolic acts of the new reign was a change of name. The young pharaoh abandoned the name Tutankhaten, with its association to the discredited Aten, and adopted the name Tutankhamun, living image of Amun. This change spoke volumes. The gods of old were to return, their place in Egypt's life restored. In decrees issued by the court, the damage done by Akhenaten's reforms was acknowledged. The temples would be reopened, the neglected gods honored anew. The people of Egypt, weary from years of spiritual upheaval, welcomed these words with relief. For Tutankhamun, the early years of his reign were shaped by ceremony and restoration. Though young and inexperienced, he embodied a symbol of hope. The image of a boy king reaching back toward tradition resonated deeply. In palace and temple, there was much work to be done, and though his reign would be short, its significance would echo across the ages. Reopening the temples. Step by step, the old ways returned. Across Egypt, the grand temples that had once stood as centers of life and faith stirred back to activity. Their gates were unsealed, altars were cleansed, statues of the gods, long hidden or defaced, were restored to their places of honor. The air once again filled with the sounds of hymns and the scent of incense. Priests, many of whom had been driven into obscurity during Akhenaten's reign, returned to their sacred duties. Their power, diminished under the Atenist reforms, now surged once more. Festivals and public ceremonies, so vital to the spiritual and communal fabric of Egyptian society, were revived. The people, longing for the familiar rhythms of their ancestors, embraced the return of these rites. Yet the scars of the past were not so easily healed. Akhenaten's sweeping changes had left deep divisions. In some regions, damage to temples remained visible. Inscriptions had been chiseled away, sacred images destroyed. The process of restoration would take years, its progress a symbol of Egypt's slow recovery. In royal proclamations, the pharaoh's court made it clear balance was being restored. The concept of ma'at, order, harmony, and justice, lay at the heart of this effort. The gods had not abandoned Egypt. They had merely awaited the nation's return to wisdom and reverence. For Tutankhamun himself, these acts of restoration served both faith and statecraft. The re-establishment of the priesthood shored up political stability. The alliance between crown and temple, fractured under Akhenaten, was mended. Through these efforts, the boy king became a bridge between a troubled past and a more hopeful future. Yet for all the progress, uncertainty lingered. The empire remained weakened. Internal rivalries simmered beneath the surface. And while the young pharaoh's heart may have been pure, the forces shaping Egypt's destiny were vast and complex. Still, as the gods returned to their rightful places, a sense of peace spread through the land. In the temples of Karnak, in the sanctuaries of Memphis, and in humble shrines along the Nile, Egyptians lifted their voices once more to the ancient gods, grateful that, for a time, the world seemed set right again. A short reign, a long legacy. Though he wore the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, Tutankhamun's reign was destined to be brief. After a decade on the throne, the young pharaoh died unexpectedly, likely before reaching his 20th year. The cause of his death remains a matter of debate: injury, illness, or a combination of frailties. The truth lies buried beneath the sands of time. At the moment of his passing, Tutankhamun was still a boy, scarcely older than the statues that would depict him in timeless stone. Yet the work he had overseen, the restoration of Egypt's traditional faith, would endure beyond his years. For millennia, Tutankhamun's name was a minor footnote in Egypt's grand history, overshadowed by the great warrior pharaohs and the builders of mighty temples. He seemed a figure of little consequence. His tomb was modest compared to those of more powerful kings, tucked away in the Valley of the Kings. But fate would grant Tutankhamun an immortality beyond that of any pharaoh. In 1922, British archaeologist Howard Carter discovered the boy king's tomb, remarkably intact, untouched by grave robbers. As Carter peered through a small opening into the chamber, he glimpsed a treasure beyond imagination. Golden shrines, statues, jewelry, chariots, and most famously, the solid gold funerary mask that would become an icon of ancient Egypt. The world was captivated. Newspapers and radios carried the story of the boy king to every corner of the globe. The discovery sparked a wave of fascination with ancient Egypt, a legacy that continues to this day. Through the artifacts found in his tomb, Tutankhamun's brief life was illuminated in vivid detail. The craftsmanship, the artistry, the devotion, evident in each object, spoke of a civilization at its height. Even amid political turmoil, his burial treasures offered a rare, unfiltered glimpse into the beliefs, values, and splendor of ancient Egypt. Thus, the young pharaoh who had ruled in a time of restoration became in death a symbol of Egypt's timeless allure. His name, once nearly lost to history, now stands among the most famous in the world, a golden window into a vanished age. Death of a dynasty. With the passing of Tutankhamun, the royal bloodline of the 18th dynasty stood on the brink of extinction. The boy king left no surviving heirs. In the shadows of the court, powerful figures maneuvered to shape Egypt's future. Chief among them was I, the elderly advisor who had guided Tutankhamun's reign. Seizing the moment, I assumed the throne, marrying the young widow Ankhesenamun to legitimize his claim. Yet his rule would be brief, more a bridge between dynasties than a new foundation. Meanwhile, General Horemheb, a skilled military leader and loyal servant of the crown, watched and waited. Though not of royal blood, Horemheb commanded respect and influence. Upon A's death, Horemheb ascended to the throne, marking a new chapter in Egypt's history. The transition was not without strife. Questions of legitimacy, loyalty, and vision loomed large. The scars left by Akhenaten's revolution had not fully healed. The task of restoring Egypt's stability, political as well as spiritual, remained daunting. Under Horemheb, further, efforts were made to erase the memory of the Atenist heresy. Inscriptions were altered. Monuments of Akhenaten were defaced or dismantled. The official records sought to present an unbroken line of devotion to the traditional gods, smoothing over the turbulence of recent years. Yet beneath this careful reconstruction, the legacy of the boy king lingered. Though Tutankhamun's reign had been short and shaped by others, his symbolic role in Egypt's return to tradition held deep meaning. The memory of the boy who had guided Egypt back to its gods, however briefly, endured in the hearts of his people. As one dynasty faded and another rose, Egypt continued its eternal journey, shaped by the dreams of rulers, the prayers of its people, and the enduring flow of the Nile. In the quiet tomb of the Valley of the Kings, beneath layers of earth and stone, the boy king rested in golden silence, his story waiting to be told to the world once more. Chapter 13. Ramses the Great, Egypt's last pharaoh of glory. The sun rose over the golden sands of Egypt, as it had for millennia. But on this day, the light seemed to shine with renewed promise. A new pharaoh was about to ascend, a young prince whose name would one day echo through the halls of time. Ramses II, born to Pharaoh Seti the Firm and Queen Tuya, Ramses was raised in a world of power, tradition, and ambition. Even as a boy, he walked the grand courts of Egypt, watching his father rule with wisdom and strength. From an early age, Ramses was groomed for greatness. His education was rigorous, steeped in the art of governance, the strategy of war, and the sacred duties of the divine king. At just 14, Ramses was appointed Prince Regent, sharing authority with his aging father. This rare honor reflected the faith Seti placed in his son. Ramses embraced the role with vigor, learning to lead armies, oversee construction projects, and perform rituals at the great temples of Egypt. When Seti I passed, Ramses officially ascended the throne. Still a young man, he brought with him boundless energy and towering ambition. He envisioned a reign that would surpass all who came before him, a reign that would restore Egypt's faded glory and leave an immortal mark upon the land. The kingdom he inherited was still strong, but shadows loomed on the horizon. The mighty Hittite Empire pressed from the north, challenging Egypt's hold over its vassal states in Canaan and Syria. Trade routes were threatened, allies wavered, yet Ramses was undeterred. He took to the task of kingship with relentless determination. Military campaigns were launched, temples and monuments rose from the desert floor. Propaganda proclaimed the greatness of the new pharaoh. Ramses would become many things: warrior, builder, father to many, and living God in the eyes of his people. But above all, he would become a symbol of Egypt's last great age, when the power of the Nile still reached beyond its banks, and the pharaoh's word carried the weight of the heavens. The Battle of Kadesh. In the 5th year of his reign, Ramses II faced his greatest military challenge. The ancient city of Kadesh, a strategic stronghold on the Orontes River, lay at the heart of the contest between Egypt and the Hittites. Control of Kadesh meant control of the trade routes and alliances that shaped the balance of power in the region. Determined to reclaim the city for Egypt, Ramses led a vast army northward. His forces included 4 great divisions, named for the gods Amun, Ra, Ptah, and Set, along with thousands of chariots and infantry. It would be one of the largest, chariot battles in recorded history. But the march to Kadesh was fraught with deception. The Hittites, led by their king Muwatalli II, had prepared an ambush. Through cunning spies and false reports, they misled Ramses into believing the enemy was far away. In truth, the Hittite forces lay hidden near Kadesh, ready to strike. As Ramses and his Amun division camped near the city, the trap was sprung. Hittite chariots thundered across the plain, catching the Egyptians off guard. The situation was dire. Yet amid the chaos, Ramses displayed remarkable leadership. Leaping into his chariot, he rallied his troops. Driving through the enemy lines, he inspired a fierce counterattack. Reinforcements from the Tar division arrived, turning the tide of battle. After fierce fighting, the Hittites withdrew into the city's fortified walls. The battle ended in stalemate. Kadesh remained contested. Yet upon his return to Egypt, Ramses ensured the narrative of victory. Grand inscriptions adorned the walls of Karnak, Luxor, and Abu Simbel, proclaiming Ramses' heroism and the might of the Egyptian army. These accounts, though embellished, served a vital purpose. They reinforced Ramses' image as a warrior king, a pharaoh favored by the gods, protector of Egypt's honor. The story of Kadesh would be told for generations, not merely as a record of war, but as a timeless symbol of courage and leadership. Through this battle, Ramses secured more than a military outcome. He cemented his place in the hearts of his people and the chronicles of history, a pharaoh who stood unshaken amid the storm. Temples without rival. While Ramses II waged war abroad, at home he embarked upon a campaign of monumental building unrivaled in scope. The land of Egypt became his canvas, its temples and monuments a testament to his vision of eternal glory. Chief among these wonders was the grand temple complex of Abu Simbel. Carved into the cliffs of Nubia, this breathtaking site featured colossal statues of Ramses himself, each towering over 60 feet high. Seated upon his throne, flanked by images of the gods, Ramses gazed out over the Nile, a living god immortalized in stone. Inside, the temple's walls told stories of triumph, most notably the Battle of Kadesh. Scenes of chariot warfare, divine favor, and royal ceremony adorned the chambers, casting Ramses as both warrior and divine intermediary. Yet Abu Simbel was but one jewel in the crown of his achievements. Across Egypt, Ramses left his mark. The Ramesseum, his mortuary temple at Thebes, rose in majestic splendor. Its vast halls and towering columns celebrated the pharaoh's deeds and devotion. At Luxor and Karnak, Ramses expanded the great temples. New statues, obelisks, and courtyards bore his likeness. Inscriptions proclaimed his piety and power. No previous ruler had built so widely or with such grandeur. Even in the distant regions of the empire, Ramses commissioned temples to reinforce Egypt's presence. His image, chiseled in stone, was meant to endure for ages, to remind all who gazed upon it that Egypt stood strong, guided by a pharaoh of unmatched greatness. Through this vast building program, Ramses sought more than personal glory. He aimed to unite his people through shared symbols of faith and pride. The temples served as centers of worship, civic life, and royal authority. They bound the land together in a common vision, one where pharaoh, god, and people existed in harmony. As centuries passed, many of these monuments would fade or crumble, yet the legacy of Ramses the Builder would endure, etched into the very bones of Egypt. Even today, as travelers stand before the statues of Abu Simbel or wander the columns of Karnak, they walk in the shadow of a king who sought to defy time itself. A living god, Ramses II reigned for an astonishing 66 years. a span unmatched by nearly any pharaoh before or after. Over the course of his long life, he became not merely a king, but a living god in the eyes of his people. The aura of divinity was carefully cultivated. Statues portrayed Ramses with idealized features, eternal youth, and the regalia of the gods. Inscriptions spoke of his closeness to Amun, Ra, and Ptah. Festivals honored him alongside the deities of the land. For ordinary Egyptians, the line between human ruler and divine presence blurred. This image was reinforced through ceremony and spectacle. Ramses presided over grand processions, temple dedications, and rituals of renewal. His court glittered with wealth. Foreign envoys brought tribute and sought alliances, drawn by Egypt's enduring prestige. Yet beneath the splendor, subtle signs of change emerged. Egypt's military power, though still formidable, began to wane. The Hittite Empire remained a rival. After years of conflict, Ramses forged a peace treaty with the Hittites, one of the earliest recorded in history. Though presented as a triumph, it reflected a pragmatic shift. Egypt could no longer rely solely on force to maintain its position. Domestically, the pharaoh faced challenges. The costs of endless building and prolonged campaigns strained resources. The influence of the priesthood grew, particularly at Thebes. Behind the enduring image of Ramses the Great, the foundations of empire began to show cracks. Still, for the people of Egypt, Ramses remained a symbol of stability and continuity. Generations knew no other ruler. His long reign provided a sense of unbroken order in an uncertain world. As age finally claimed him, Ramses left behind a vast legacy, a land adorned with his monuments, a history shaped by his deeds. Yet he also left Egypt at a crossroads. The power that had defined the new kingdom was beginning to ebb. The glories of the past would soon give way to new trials. But in stone and story, Ramses the Great would endure. His name would live on, whispered in the winds of the desert, carved into the pillars of temples, shining in the memory of an age when Egypt stood at the height of its splendor. Its pharaoh, a god among men. Chapter 14. The Slow Decline. The sun still rose each morning over the land of the Nile. Its golden rays glinted off the great temples and statues that spoke of Egypt's glory. But beneath this brilliant surface, unseen forces were gathering. The long reign of Ramses the Great had left behind a kingdom heavy with triumph and heavy with strain. Egypt's empire had once stretched wide, from the deserts of Nubia to the mountains of Syria. Its armies had marched boldly, its wealth had dazzled. But holding such vast territories came at a price. The demands of maintaining distant garrisons and managing complex alliances grew ever more burdensome. The treasury, once overflowing with tribute and gold, began to feel the weight of constant campaigns and monumental building. Ramses' successors faced a daunting inheritance. The world beyond Egypt was shifting. In the north, the Hittite Empire showed signs of renewal. In the Mediterranean, new peoples stirred. Trade routes became less secure. Goods that once flowed easily now arrived with delay or not at all. At home, the strain of sustaining a grand court and appeasing powerful religious institutions deepened divisions. The people of Egypt, farmers, artisans, and merchants, carried the burden of taxation. Grumblings of unrest echoed through the villages and cities. The pharaohs of this new age were not without courage. They sought to hold the empire together, to defend Egypt's honor and prosperity, but the forces they faced were vast and complex. One after another, territories on the empire's fringes slipped away. Vassal states once bound by fear and loyalty began to chart their own paths. Yet Egypt itself remained proud. The temples still stood, the Nile still flooded. The memory of greatness was fresh, but as each year passed, the weight of empire pressed harder upon the land and its rulers. The slow decline had begun, not with a single blow, but with the quiet erosion of power and certainty. The coming of the Sea Peoples. Among the many challenges Egypt faced, none would prove more unsettling than the arrival of the Sea Peoples, a wave of mysterious invaders whose origins remain shrouded in the mists of history. They came from the north, moving across the Mediterranean with swift ships and fierce determination. Their names, Sherden, Peliset, and others, would be carved into Egyptian records, but their homelands remain uncertain. Some believe they were displaced peoples fleeing upheaval. Others suggest they were warriors seeking new lands to claim. Whatever their cause, their impact was undeniable. The Sea Peoples descended upon the coasts of the eastern Mediterranean, devastating cities and kingdoms in their path. Hittite power crumbled. The shores of Canaan burned. The established order of the region trembled. Egypt watched with growing alarm. By the reign of Ramses III, the Sea Peoples turned their eyes southward, toward the rich delta of the Nile. They came in great numbers, by land and sea, a force unlike any Egypt had faced. Ramses III rose to meet the threat. He prepared Egypt's defenses with care, stationing troops along the coast and fortifying key cities. When the Sea Peoples launched their assault, they encountered a foe ready to stand firm. The battles were fierce. On land, Egyptian archers and charioteers clashed with the invaders. At sea, a great naval engagement unfolded. Ramses III, through careful strategy and leadership, secured a hard-fought victory. The Sea Peoples were repelled. Their advance halted at Egypt's gates. Yet even in victory, Egypt was changed. The effort to defeat the Sea Peoples strained the kingdom further. Resources were depleted, cities damaged. The psychological toll was deep. The knowledge that Egypt's heartland had been so closely threatened lingered. The assault marked a turning point. Though Egypt survived where others fell, the wider world had shifted. The old empires lay in ruins or disarray. Trade networks had collapsed. Egypt stood more isolated, its sphere of influence diminished. The Sea Peoples had come and gone, but their shadow remained, a reminder that no kingdom, however great, could stand untouched by the tides of change. A land divided as external threats mounted, Egypt faced growing challenges from within. The once unified kingdom began to fray, its power centers divided between throne and temple. Central to this tension was the rising influence of the high priests of Amun. Based in Thebes, the Amun priesthood had grown immensely wealthy and powerful during the new kingdom's height. With vast estates, armies of workers, and deep ties to the populace, the priest wielded influence rivaling that of the pharaoh. As the strength of Egypt's royal house waned, the balance shifted further. In Upper Egypt, the high priests effectively governed, maintaining their own courts and commanding loyalty. The pharaoh's authority, especially in the south, became more symbolic than real. This division weakened the kingdom's cohesion. The north and south pursued separate interests. Rivalries simmered. Attempts to restore unity often led to further conflict. Dynasties rose and fell in quick succession, some pharaohs mere pawns in the hands of powerful courtiers or priests. Amid this instability, ordinary Egyptians sought continuity in their daily lives. The cycle of the Nile endured. Farmers tended their fields, artisans crafted their wares, and the great festivals of the gods continued, though often more as local expressions than national celebrations. Yet the spiritual heart of Egypt remained torn. The Amun priests presented themselves as the true guardians of Ma'at, the sacred order. Pharaohs sought to reassert their divine mandate, but lacked the means to do so fully. The unity that had once bound Egypt from Delta to Nubia gave way to a patchwork of competing powers. This was not a sudden collapse, but a slow unraveling. The grandeur of the past lingered, but the machinery of empire had grown brittle. In the temples and palaces, in the marketplaces and village squares, the people of Egypt lived with the knowledge that the golden age was passing, holding on to greatness. And yet, through it all, Egypt remained a land of profound cultural richness. Even as its political power faded, its spirit endured. Temples continued to rise, though fewer in number and scale. The great works of earlier pharaohs inspired new generations. Craftsmen and artists preserved the timeless styles of Egyptian art, their hands guided by tradition and reverence. Language, too, remained a vessel of continuity. Hieroglyphic writing, refined over centuries, continued to adorn tombs and monuments. Sacred texts were copied with care. The wisdom of the past, stories of gods, kings, and moral order, was passed down, bridging the gap between fading empire and living culture. Belief in the gods remained strong. The people turned to Osiris for comfort in death, to Isis for protection, to Amun for guidance. The festivals of the Nile's flood, the rituals of renewal, the daily offerings in humble shrines, all spoke to a civilization still deeply connected to its sacred roots. Even beyond Egypt's borders, its legacy resonated. Travelers and traders carried tales of the land of the pharaohs, a place of wonders, of ancient wisdom, of a civilization that had stood longer than any other. In time, new powers would rise, foreign rulers would claim Egypt's throne. The age of native pharaohs would end. But the essence of Egypt, the pulse of the Nile, the gaze of its timeless statues, the words etched in stone, would endure. For Egypt's greatness was not solely in conquest or wealth, but in its resilience. Through war and peace, through unity and division, it held fast to the threads of culture and faith that had defined it for millennia. And so, even as the sun set on its empire, Egypt remained luminous, a beacon of human achievement, its story forever woven into the fabric of history. Chapter 15: Foreign Pharaohs. The Nile still flowed, and the ancient temples still stood, their stone walls kissed by the rising sun. Yet the Egypt of this era was no longer the great empire of Ramses or Thutmose. The long shadow of decline had settled across the two lands. Native rule had faltered, and now foreign kings stepped into the space once filled by the mighty pharaohs of old. In the Delta, Libyan chieftains rose in prominence. For generations, Libyan mercenaries had served in Egypt's armies. Over time, they gained land, titles, and influence. As the authority of the central government weakened, these Libyan leaders carved out their own domains, often ruling as local lords in the Western Delta. Eventually, some among them laid claim to the full kingship. They adopted the trappings of pharaohs, donning the double crown, performing the sacred rituals, commissioning inscriptions in the ancient style. Yet their power rested not upon grand conquest or divine mandate, but upon military strength and strategic alliances. The unity of Egypt remained fragile, its governance fractured. In Upper Egypt, another power was stirring. To the south, beyond the First Cataract, the kingdom of Kush had grown strong. Centered in the land of Nubia, The Kushites revered Egyptian culture. Their kings styled themselves as heirs to the pharaohs, even as they ruled from distant Napata. As the divisions within Egypt deepened, the Kushite kings saw an opportunity, not for plunder, but for restoration. They believed themselves chosen to revive Egypt's ancient glory, and so, with reverence and resolve, they prepared to cross the border, not as conquerors alone, but as champions of Ma'at, the sacred order that once bound the two lands. Thus began a new chapter in Egypt's story, one where foreign kings wore the double crown, each seeking to restore what had been lost, each shaped by both admiration and ambition. The Kushite Renaissance. When the Kushite kings advanced into Egypt, they came not as strangers, but as men steeped in the land's ancient traditions. From their palaces in Napata, they had long honored Amun and other Egyptian gods. They had built temples in Egyptian style, ruled with Egyptian titles, and traced their lineage through the timeless line of pharaohs. Their leader, Paye, was a devout and capable ruler. When he marched north, he proclaimed his mission not as conquest, but as renewal. He sought to reunite Egypt, to restore the faded splendor of the old ways. His inscriptions speak of reverence for Amun and a desire to bring harmony to a divided land. Paye's campaign met with success. One by one, local rulers submitted to his authority, whether by choice or by force. By the time he returned to Napata, Egypt was nominally reunited under Kushite rule. His successors, including the Great Taharqa, would further cement this legacy. Under Kushite kingship, Egypt experienced a cultural renaissance. Temples long neglected were restored. Ancient rituals were revived with deep sincerity. The high priests of Amun, allied with their southern patrons, regained influence. Across the land, the timeless rhythm of Egyptian religious life beat strong. Once more, art and architecture flourished. New works honored the gods and celebrated the pharaohs, blending Kushite and Egyptian styles. Inscriptions from this era reveal a profound respect for tradition, a yearning to connect with the glories of the past. Yet beneath this revival, challenges remained. Egypt's political landscape was still fractured. The Delta remained a contested region, its loyalty to the Kushite rulers uncertain. Beyond Egypt's borders, new powers loomed, chief among them the formidable Assyrian Empire. The Kushite pharaohs ruled with dignity and vision, striving to uphold the ancient order, but the winds of change were rising. The Renaissance they fostered, though genuine, would prove fragile in the face of the storms to come. Assyrian shadows. Far to the northeast, in the heart of Mesopotamia, the Assyrian Empire had reached the height of its power. Its kings commanded vast armies and ruled with an iron hand. Their ambitions extended across the Near East, and soon toward Egypt itself. The Assyrians viewed Egypt not only as a rival power, but as a land of wealth and prestige. Control over Egypt would grant them mastery of vital trade routes and immense resources. The Kushite pharaohs, aware of this threat, prepared for the coming storm. The first Assyrian incursions were met with resistance. Pharaoh Taharqa led Egypt's armies with courage, fighting to defend both his throne and the sacred land he had sworn to protect. The battles were fierce, the outcome uncertain, but the Assyrians were relentless. Their military machine was unmatched, disciplined, brutal, and efficient. Time and again, they pressed their advantage, exploiting Egypt's internal divisions and political instability. Eventually, the Assyrians breached the Delta. Their campaigns left devastation in their wake. Cities were sacked, temples desecrated, and the fragile unity of the land shattered once more. Taharqa retreated to Nubia, carrying with him the hopes of those who had believed in the Kushite Revival. In the north, puppet rulers were installed, Egyptians in name, but beholden to the Assyrian throne. The ancient land of the pharaohs, once a beacon of strength and culture, now stood humbled beneath foreign power. The Assyrian conquest marked a profound turning point. Though their rule over Egypt would be brief, its impact was lasting. The sense of invincibility that had once surrounded the Nile kingdom was gone. The memory of independence lingered, but the path to true restoration grew ever more uncertain. The twilight of pharaohs, and yet, through conquest and decline, through rebellion and foreign rule, the institution of pharaoh endured. No longer the sovereign power of old, it remained a potent symbol of Egypt's identity, a thread connecting past to present. In this twilight age, pharaohs continued to be crowned. They performed the sacred rites, upheld the festivals of the gods, and adorned the temples with offerings. Their authority was diminished, often constrained by foreign overlords or internal rivals. Yet, in the hearts of many Egyptians, the pharaohs still embodied the link between the people and the divine. Cultural life persisted with resilience. Scribes continued to copy ancient texts. Artists preserved the classic forms. Temples remained centers of devotion. The great myths of Osiris, Isis, and Horus were still told by flickering lamplight, their timeless lessons offering comfort in uncertain times. Among the common people, daily life followed its familiar rhythm. The Nile still rose and fell. Crops were planted and harvested. The stars traced their eternal paths across the night sky. Amid the turbulence of kings and empires, the enduring pulse of Egyptian life continued. In the fading light of the new kingdom and its successors, Egypt's legacy became less about temporal power and more about cultural memory. The image of the pharaoh, seated upon his throne, crowned with the double crown, holding the crook and flail, remained a beacon of continuity. As foreign rulers came and went, as new dynasties rose and fell, this ancient vision persisted. It would inspire later generations, captivate foreign conquerors, and eventually shape the imagination of the world. Egypt's twilight was not an end, but a transformation. The empire had faded, but its spirit endured, in stone, in story, in the hearts of those who walked beneath the timeless gaze of the gods. Chapter 16: The Sais Revival. As the long night of Egypt's decline wore on, hope flickered faintly along the marshy shores of the delta. The once mighty kingdom had endured centuries of turmoil, foreign conquest, internal division, and the slow erosion of Pharaoh's power. Yet from the city of Sais, nestled amid winding canals and fertile fields, a new vision of Egypt began to take shape. It was here, in the western delta, that the 26th dynasty, known as the Sais Kings, rose to prominence. Their leader, Psamtik I, was a shrewd and capable ruler. Backed by local alliances and aided by shifting tides of foreign influence, he seized the opportunity to restore native rule. For the first time in generations, an Egyptian-born dynasty once again held the double crown. From the outset, the Sais kings understood the weight of their task. They ruled a land weary of strife, haunted by the memories of past glories. To restore Egypt's strength, they would need more than armies. They would need to rekindle the nation's ancient spirit. Psamtik I began by reuniting Egypt under his authority. Through diplomacy and force, he brought the fragmented regions back into a semblance of unity. He respected the power of the priesthood, forging bonds with the temples that had long served as pillars of Egyptian life. In doing so, he anchored his rule in both tradition and pragmatism. Trade was revived. The Nile once again bustled with activity. Foreign merchants returned to Egyptian ports, bringing goods and ideas from across the Mediterranean. The Sais kings encouraged this exchange, recognizing that Egypt's future would be shaped not in isolation, but through connection. Perhaps most importantly, they fostered a renaissance of culture. The old arts were celebrated anew. Temples were restored. Inscriptions evoked the grandeur of earlier dynasties. The people of Egypt, long burdened by uncertainty, looked once more to their pharaohs with cautious hope. From Sais, this revival spread outward, a beacon of renewal in a land that had known too much sorrow. For a time, it seemed that Egypt's ancient soul had found its voice again, carried by the winds that whispered through the reeds of the delta. Ships of the Nile central to this new era of revival was the resurgence of Egypt's naval power. For centuries, the Nile had been Egypt's lifeline, a river of commerce, culture, and faith. But now, Egyptian ships looked beyond the river to the wide expanse of the Mediterranean. The Sais kings understood that Egypt's prosperity depended on vibrant trade. To that end, they commissioned new fleets of sturdy vessels, ships built not only for the familiar currents of the Nile, but for the open sea. Carpenters and shipwrights labored along the riverbanks, crafting hulls of cedar and acacia, their sails ready to catch the winds of distant waters. These ships sailed northward, their prows cutting through the blue depths of the Great Green, as the Egyptians called the Mediterranean. They reached the bustling ports of Phoenicia, the Isles of Cyprus, and the shores of Greece. In return, Egyptian goods, grain, linen, papyrus, and crafted wares found eager markets abroad. More than trade traveled along these routes. Ideas, art, and innovation flowed with equal vigor. Greek merchants and scholars arrived in Egyptian cities, drawn by the land's storied past and vibrant present. They marveled at the great temples, studied the wisdom of Egyptian priests, and carried home tales of a civilization both ancient and enduring. This exchange enriched both worlds. Greek art and philosophy absorbed elements of Egyptian thought. Egyptian artisans experimented with new forms and techniques inspired by foreign influences. The Mediterranean became not a barrier, but a bridge, a realm where cultures met and mingled. For the first time in generations, Egypt's voice was heard once more upon the sea. Its ships, marked with the symbols of Pharaoh, sailed proudly beneath the sun. In every foreign harbor where they docked, they carried with them the hope of a nation reborn, a testament to the resilience and adaptability of the Egyptian spirit. Cultural renewal. As Egypt's ships ventured outward, a parallel journey unfolded. Within its borders, a journey into the depths of its own heritage. Under the Sais kings, a deliberate and profound cultural renewal took shape, one rooted in reverence for the past. Artisans, scribes, and builders looked back to the golden ages of Egypt, the Old Kingdom, when the pyramids rose beneath a timeless sky, the Middle Kingdom, when wisdom and literature flourished, the New Kingdom, when Egypt's influence reached far and wide. These epochs became sources of inspiration, their forms and motifs lovingly revived. In sculpture, the serene faces of earlier pharaohs were echoed in new works. Statues of the Sais rulers bore the calm, idealized expressions of their forebears, linking the present to a lineage that stretched back millennia. Relief carvings adorned temple walls with scenes that could have graced the monuments of Karnak or Saqqara, their lines crisp and harmonious. Hieroglyphic inscriptions flourished. Scribes trained in the ancient arts composed texts with precision, preserving the sacred language even as spoken Egyptian evolved. Old literary works were recopied and studied anew, their timeless wisdom resonating in a world much changed. Temples became centers of this revival. Restored and rededicated, they echoed with hymns that had not been heard in generations. The great festivals of the gods were celebrated once more, drawing crowds of worshippers who sought connection with the divine order. In every aspect of life, the Sais Renaissance honored continuity. It sought not to innovate, but to reaffirm. In doing so, it provided the Egyptian people with a sense of stability and identity, an anchor amid the uncertainties of the wider world. Yet this cultural flowering was not mere nostalgia, it was an act of resilience. By looking to the past, Egypt found strength for the present. Through art and ritual, it proclaimed that though empires might rise and fall, the spirit of the Nile endured. A fragile renaissance. And yet, beneath the surface of this revival, Egypt's fragility remained. The world beyond its borders had grown more turbulent. Powerful empires circled like vultures, their ambitions ever expanding. To the east, the Persian Empire rose with alarming speed. Its kings commanded vast armies and sought dominion over all lands within reach. Egypt, rich in resources and steeped in ancient prestige, was an irresistible prize. Within Egypt, divisions persisted. The authority of the Sais kings, though genuine, rested upon delicate balances. The loyalty of powerful provincial elites was not assured. The priesthood, while supportive, maintained its own interests. The military, revitalized though it was, could not match the sheer might of emerging foreign powers. The Mediterranean, once a realm of opportunity, now brought new threats. Naval forces of rival states grew bolder. Foreign alliances shifted with little warning. Egypt's strategic position became both a blessing and a vulnerability. As these pressures mounted, the Sais kings endeavored to hold fast. They forged diplomatic ties, strengthened defenses, and sought alliances with the Greek city-states. Greek mercenaries served in Egypt's armies, their skills valued even as their presence underscored Egypt's dependence on foreign aid. But time was against them. The tide of history was turning. The forces gathering beyond Egypt's horizons could not be held at bay forever. Yet even as the sands of time ran thin, the pharaohs of Sais clung to their vision. They preserved Egypt's culture, championed its legacy, and stood as symbols of resilience. The temples still stood, the Nile still flowed, and in the hearts of the people, the spirit of Egypt remained unbroken. In the twilight of pharaohs, amid uncertainty and change, the Sais Renaissance shone, a fragile, beautiful flame, flickering bravely against the gathering darkness. Chapter 17. The Persian Conquest. The sun still rose each day over the Nile. It touched the stone faces of ancient statues and shimmered upon the sacred waters. But Egypt's glory, long worn thin, now faced its greatest threat. From the east, beyond the shifting deserts and great rivers, the Persian Empire stirred, a force vast, disciplined, and relentless. By the late 6th century BCE, the Persian king Cambyses, son of Cyrus the Great, had set his sights on Egypt. The land of the pharaohs was one of the last jewels beyond Persian grasp. Rich in resources, ancient in prestige, it remained a beacon of wealth and culture. Cambyses prepared his forces well. His armies stretched in number and skill, bolstered by alliances and naval power. Egypt, now under the rule of Psamtik III, the Sais, last king of the 26th dynasty, stood vulnerable. Though the Sais Renaissance had revived aspects of Egyptian life, the kingdom's military strength could not match the Persian juggernaut. Internal divisions and previous conflicts had sapped Egypt's ability to mount a unified defense. In 525 BCE, Cambyses led his invasion. His forces advanced through the Sinai, overcoming natural obstacles with engineering skill. At Pelusium, near the eastern gateway of Egypt, the decisive battle was joined. Accounts from the time speak of desperate Egyptian resistance. But the outcome was clear. The Persians, well led and determined, defeated the native army. Psamtik III was captured. With this victory, Cambyses entered Memphis, the heart of Lower Egypt. There, he proclaimed himself Pharaoh, king of the two lands. The sacred rites were performed, though under the watchful eyes of Persian governors. Egypt, once sovereign, was now a satrapy, a province of the Persian Empire. The fall was profound. For the first time in its long history, Egypt lay fully under foreign rule, its independence stripped away by the weight of empire. Yet even in this dark moment, the spirit of the land remained unbroken. Beneath the outward forms of submission, a deeper current stirred, one that would carry Egypt through the trials ahead. Resistance and revolt Egyptians, proud of their heritage and wary of foreign rule, did not yield easily to Persian dominion. The land of the Nile had known many invaders, but never a conqueror who sought such deep control. Beneath the official ceremonies and oaths of loyalty, resistance simmered. In the first years of Persian rule, the Persian kings maintained a delicate balance. They respected Egyptian customs outwardly, allowing temples to function and rituals to continue. Yet the presence of foreign administrators and soldiers weighed heavily on the populace. Taxes increased. Traditional privileges eroded. The symbols of Pharaoh's divine authority grew hollow under Persian command. It was not long before open revolt flared. Across the Delta and into Upper Egypt, local leaders rallied supporters. Temples became centers of resistance, their priests invoking the ancient gods to aid the cause. Peasants and artisans joined the struggle, driven by a longing to see Egypt ruled once more by one of its own. Some revolts gained ground, capturing cities and challenging Persian control. But the might of the empire was difficult to shake. Persian generals responded with ruthless efficiency. Rebellions were crushed, their leaders executed or exiled. The cycle repeated, hope flaring briefly, only to be dimmed again. Yet even in failure, these uprisings kept the flame of Egyptian identity alive. Each act of defiance reinforced the bond between people and land, between present and past. The knowledge that resistance was possible, even if not yet victorious, sustained a quiet determination. Throughout the Persian period, this pattern endured. Waves of revolt punctuated years of occupation. Though none succeeded in restoring lasting independence, they prevented complete assimilation. Egypt remained distinct, its soul intact beneath the foreign yoke. In whispered prayers and secret gatherings, Egyptians continued to dream of liberation. The ancient gods were called upon not only for protection, but for deliverance. The Nile flowed on, its eternal rhythm a silent witness to a people's enduring will. A cultural shield. While swords and chariots battled on the fields, another form of resistance unfolded in quieter realms. Egyptian priests and scribes, the custodians of the land's sacred knowledge, became stewards of cultural survival. Through their efforts, the essence of Egypt remained alive, even as political sovereignty faded. The temples, though under scrutiny, continued to serve as sanctuaries of tradition. Within their walls, ancient hymns were sung, offerings were made, and rites were performed with unwavering devotion. The gods of Egypt, Amun, Osiris, Isis, and others, were honored daily. Their images lovingly maintained, scribes played a vital role in this preservation. They copied old texts with meticulous care, religious hymns, medical treatises, historical records, and stories from the Golden Ages. Through their work, the hieroglyphic script remained a living language, not merely an artifact of the past. Artisans contributed as well. Statues and reliefs created during the Persian period echoed the forms of earlier dynasties. The timeless profile of Pharaoh, the flowing garments of the gods, the harmonious lines of temple carvings, all continue to reflect the ideals of Egyptian art. In these works, continuity triumphed over conquest. Even education became an act of cultural defense. In the houses of life, temple schools where scribes were trained, young Egyptians learned the sacred language, the stories of their ancestors, and the principles of Ma'at. These teachings reinforced a collective identity that no foreign power could fully erase. Persian rulers, pragmatic in their approach, allowed much of this cultural life to persist. They recognized that overt suppression would fuel deeper unrest. Yet this tolerance did not diminish the significance of what was preserved. Each ritual performed, each text copied, each statue crafted, was an act of quiet defiance, a declaration that Egypt's spirit endured. Through this cultural shield, Egyptians protected their heritage from oblivion. They understood that while political fortunes might rise and fall, the essence of a civilization, its values, its stories, its vision of the divine, could transcend the tides of history. In this, they succeeded. The heart of Egypt remained strong, its voice waiting for the day it might again speak freely, waiting for a savior. 2 centuries would pass beneath the shadow of Persian rule. Through it all, hope endured. A patient, quiet hope, nourished by memory and faith. Egyptians longed for a new pharaoh, one who would cast off the foreign yoke and restore the land's ancient dignity. Prophecies circulated among the people, stories told of a coming savior, a king who would rise with the blessing of the gods, who would drive out the Persians and renew the temples. In village gatherings, in temple precincts, such tales were whispered from elder to child, sustaining the dream of liberation. Even among the elite, this hope found voice. Nobles and priests worked to maintain lines of succession, keeping alive the traditions of native kingship. Though no pharaoh reigned in truth, the ideal of pharaoh remained central to Egyptian identity. The king was not merely a ruler, but a living embodiment of Ma'at, a sacred presence whose absence left the land wounded. Foreign events kindled new anticipation. As the Persian Empire faced challenges from within and without, Egyptians watched with cautious optimism. Each report of turmoil in the East sparked fresh dreams of freedom. When Alexander the Great rose to challenge Persian power, many Egyptians saw in him the fulfillment of long-held hopes. But for now, they waited. Through the rhythms of the Nile, through the cycles of planting and harvest, through the solemn processions of the gods, the people of Egypt kept faith. They honored the past not as a relic, but as a living promise, a testament that one day the 2 lands would again be whole. In the quiet corners of the temples, beneath the gaze of timeless statues, this hope glowed softly. The priests spoke their ancient prayers. The scribes recorded the deeds of kings long gone. The artisans carved the forms of deities who had watched over Egypt for millennia. And so, beneath the heavy cloak of foreign rule, a deeper story unfolded. A story of endurance, of cultural strength, of a people who refused to forget who they were. The savior had not yet come, but Egypt waited, as it always had, with patience shaped by the eternal flow of the Nile. Chapter 18. The Macedonian Dream. The sands of Egypt whispered of change. For centuries, the land of the Nile had weathered the rule of foreign powers. First the Persians, whose grip weighed heavy upon the people, their temples, and their kings. But in 332 BCE, a new figure approached, a young conqueror whose name already echoed across distant lands. Alexander of Macedon had come, and with him rode the winds of destiny. Alexander was no stranger to the burdens of empire. By the time he reached Egypt, he had already shattered the power of Persia, laying waste to its armies across Asia Minor and beyond. Yet in Egypt, he found not resistance, but welcome. The people, weary of Persian rule, greeted Alexander as a liberator. His arrival was marked by ceremony and reverence. At Memphis, the sacred rituals of kingship were performed. The priests of Ptah and Amun recognized Alexander as pharaoh, anointed with the sacred oils, crowned with the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. Here, amid the timeless rites of the land, the son of a foreign king became Egypt's new ruler. Alexander, wise beyond his years, embraced Egyptian tradition with sincerity. He honored the gods, made offerings at the great temples, and consulted the oracle of Amun at Siwa Oasis, a journey that would leave a profound mark upon him. There, beneath the desert sky, the oracle hailed him as son of Zeus Amun, blending Greek and Egyptian divinity in a moment of lasting symbolism. Yet Alexander's gaze extended beyond the spiritual. He saw Egypt not only as a jewel of antiquity, but as a land of potential, a bridge between East and West, between the old world and the new. And in this vision, he would lay the foundation for a city that would shape the course of history. The founding of Alexandria. On the windswept shores of the Mediterranean, where the Nile's waters mingled with the sea, Alexander envisioned a city unlike any other. It would bear his name, Alexandria, and stand as a beacon of learning, commerce, and culture. Here, the dreams of a young conqueror and the legacy of an ancient land would meet. The site was carefully chosen, a natural harbor, fertile hinterlands, and a strategic position between Egypt's heartland and the wider world. Plans were drawn, and construction began with purpose. The grid-like streets reflected Greek ideals of order and beauty, while the temples and palaces honored Egyptian gods and traditions. Alexandria grew swiftly. Greek settlers arrived, joined by artisans, merchants, and scholars from across the Mediterranean. The city's famed lighthouse, the Pharaohs, would later rise as one of the wonders of the ancient world, a guiding light for sailors and a symbol of human achievement. But perhaps Alexandria's greatest legacy lay in its embrace of knowledge. The Library of Alexandria, founded in the years following Alexander's death, became the greatest repository of learning in the known world. Scrolls from every land were gathered here, works of philosophy, science, literature, and history. Scholars came to study, debate, and expand the horizons of human understanding. In its streets, one could hear the languages of many peoples: Greek, Egyptian, Hebrew, Aramaic, and more. Markets bustled with goods from distant lands. Temples to Greek and Egyptian deities stood side by side, their worshippers mingling beneath the same sun. Alexandria became not only a city, but an idea, proof that cultures could converge without losing their essence, that the wisdom of the past could inspire the future. For Egypt, it was a new chapter, one where the ancient and the new danced together in the rhythm of daily life. Pharaohs of Greek blood. With Alexander's untimely death in 323 BCE, his vast empire fractured. In Egypt, power passed to one of his trusted generals, Ptolemy, son of Lagus. Thus began the Ptolemaic dynasty, Greek rulers who would wear the double crown and govern Egypt for nearly 3 centuries. The Ptolemies ruled with both wisdom and cunning. They adopted Egyptian customs, performed the sacred rites, and styled themselves as pharaohs in the eyes of their subjects. Yet they also remained deeply Hellenistic, fostering Greek art, language, and governance. This dual identity defined their reign. At court, Greek was spoken. Greek philosophy and science thrived. Yet in the temples of Karnak and Philae, the ancient rituals continued. Ptolemaic kings and queens were depicted in traditional Egyptian garb, offering to the gods with the same reverence as their native predecessors. Economically, Egypt flourished. The fertile Nile Valley remained the breadbasket of the Mediterranean. Trade expanded, linking Alexandria with markets as far as India and Spain. Greek and Egyptian artisans worked side by side, blending styles in sculpture, architecture, and jewelry. Culturally, the Ptolemies walked a careful line. They supported Egyptian priesthoods, understanding their role in maintaining social harmony. Major festivals were observed with grandeur, reinforcing the image of the Ptolemies as legitimate heirs to the pharaohs. Yet beneath this synthesis, tensions simmered. The Greek elite often held privileged positions, while native Egyptians remained wary of foreign rule. Periodic revolts flared, though the dynasty endured through diplomacy and military might. The Ptolemaic age was one of contrast and coexistence, a time when a Greek dynasty ruled an ancient land, striving to honor its traditions while forging a new cultural identity. And among these rulers, one would rise whose name would resonate through the ages, a queen whose fate would mark the end of Egypt's long royal lineage. Cleopatra, and the last pharaoh Cleopatra VII, last of the Ptolemies, ascended the throne in 51 BCE. From the outset, she proved herself a ruler of exceptional intelligence and charisma, a woman who understood both the weight of her inheritance and the challenges of her time. Unlike many of her predecessors, Cleopatra embraced the Egyptian language and identity with genuine devotion. She was often depicted in traditional garb, performing the sacred rites of Pharaoh. To her people, she was not merely a Greek queen, but a living embodiment of Ma'at, a true daughter of the Nile. Yet her reign unfolded against a backdrop of peril. Rome, now the dominant power in the Mediterranean, cast a long shadow over Egypt. Political intrigue, civil war, and shifting alliances made the queen's position precarious. In this turbulent world, Cleopatra forged alliances with Rome's most powerful men, first Julius Caesar, then Mark Antony. These relationships were as much about survival as affection, aimed at preserving Egypt's independence in the face of Roman ambition. Her entanglement with Rome would seal her fate. Following the defeat of Antony and Cleopatra's forces at the Battle of Actium, Octavian, later Augustus, advanced upon Egypt. In 30 BCE, as Roman legions entered Alexandria, Cleopatra took her own life, her death marking the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty and of Egypt's ancient monarchy. With her passing, the title of pharaoh faded into history. Egypt became a province of the Roman Empire, its royal line extinguished after more than 3,000 years. Yet Cleopatra's legacy endures. In her, the spirit of Egypt found its final voice. A queen who sought to preserve her land's sovereignty and soul amid the tides of empire. Through art, literature, and memory, she remains a symbol of beauty, intelligence, and resistance, a fitting final chapter to the story of the pharaohs. As the sun set on Egypt's ancient world, its temples, language, and culture lived on. The river flowed, the stones stood, and the story of the pharaohs, woven into the very fabric of the land, awaited those who would one day remember.